Sorry, pulled the Marty on myself. We're live with all the kind of troubles that we could have. Today was today. So, welcome back. I'm Speed at the bottom of the helix. And our next presenter grew up in South Australia, where he became a rail fan with his grandfather. They followed the SAR and AN, which was the South Australian and Australian National Railways. He has been a model railroader for more than 30 years and is currently working on his third layout, the Fallen Log Railway, which is a proto-freelance railroad predominantly modeling European locomotives and rolling stock in the 1 to 3 eras. He posts weekly how-to and product review videos on his YouTube channel called Model Railroad Techniques, and you can also find him on Facebook at Model Railroad Techniques, all in one word. Today is going to show us what you can do with the software from Freivault called Train Controller. So we welcome Darren, or better known as Dazzy J.
Thank you very much, Speed. And thanks, Speed, Brad, and I think young Marty Jenkins is loitering around there in the rooms as well. So thanks for having me along here today. So as I said, this is going to be a tutorial sort of in what I call Train Controller, which is a German-based software program. It's not sort of a total how-to how to do it, but sort of just a brief overview of the program and how I use it within my Fallen Log Railway. I've also written some articles in the Modelers Journal, which is a quarterly magazine, I should say, e-magazine that comes out on computerization, which is coming out quite soon. So what we'll do, the first thing we'll look at is I'll give you a real brief overview of my layout, so to speak. So here is the latest track plan that was drawn for me only a few days ago for the Fallen Log Railway. So it sits in a 30 by 30 foot or 10 by 10 meter for the Australians out there. It's a sort of a walk-in sort of style. If you can sort of from this sort of right-hand side of the screen between the two loops, you sort of walk in over where the north, south, east, west denominator is, and you sort of walk in sort of a U shape around the layout. It's got approximately 300 feet of mainline running, which is double track. It's got about 150 turnout or switches, depending on which part of the world you're at. And obviously we'll touch on, it's got 210 separate isolated blocks, which are detection units for occupancy detection. It's got one main classifying yard, 3 staging yards, which is about 18 tracks, which will take 18 full length trains. I do have sort of a mountain area, so the 2 to 3% sort of grade up to Nancy Station, which is right at the bottom here of the screen where it says NS. That's the very, very top. So to give you some sort of idea, I'm 6'2" in height, and it's about sort of my chin to nose height, that area. So primarily I'll run sort of freight and passenger operations, which will be run either manually or automatically via Train Controller, depending on how many operators I get. I am sort of in the process of designing switch list and sort of a waybill operation. The way it's sort of been set up, it's a bit of a branch line sort of setup. As you can see, there's not a lot of switching between sort of locations. So the electronic specifications of the railway are DCC, obviously, and I run a Roco with a capital Z21 command station. It's all Wi-Fi via the Wi-Fi hand controllers with also like the Wi-Fi throttles. Also, you can use mobile phones or tablets via Train Controller. It's got 8 power districts, 5 amp power districts, and I use Tam Valley dumb boosters for that. So thank you, Duncan, for those. And also 8 circuit breakers on the back end of that, which are DCC concepts, which are PSX ones. Layout automation, as we'll talk about soon, is via the Train Controller software. All the turnouts are either Tortoise motors, Roco solenoids, and a few DCC concept motors. And also all the turnouts are controlled via the PC, so to speak, or Train Controller. The current detection, I've got a bit of a mixed bag, which is an S88N protocol by Lesvinsky Datum Technica. Also some Roco CAN bus and some Digikais. The layout has 6 reverse loops, which are all controlled DCC concept PSSAR modules, which I absolutely love, as you can probably notice with All right. So what is Train Controller? So Train Controller is a German-based software. You may or may not have heard of it. It's sort of same or similar to JMRI, is my understanding. I'm not all that au fait with JMRI. Just seems to be by what I'm told, a little more graphical how it's set up, and you're not writing sort of scripting for it if you want to do your automations and the like. So I believe it's the best off the shelf product. So it's a little bit of controversy. I appreciate there's probably a lot of JMRI users out there. I've since sort of found some limitations of Train Controller, thanks to Speed, because he's making me go down the rabbit hole of MQTT. So we're looking into that. So we're looking at ways that we can get that into Train Controller as well. Obviously, depending on how you're running your layout, if you want sort of automation the way I've done it, there is quite a large number of occupancy detections. As I said, 210 single blocks throughout the layout to track the trains around. So that is an added expense to your modeling. So one of the reasons why I've probably gone with Train Controller is I sort of live in a reasonably remote town in South Australia. I don't have a lot of operators that can come and assist with my layout operations, so to speak. So I can set up automatic trains to and from locations to help me run the railway. So TC, or Train Controller, as it's affectionately known, we can set up some very complex routing or routing of the trains from points A, B, and C, and so on, with full collision avoidance. That's what one of the beauties of this program is, that is done by the program in the background. You don't have to write that scripting into it, which is quite nice for someone that doesn't know Java all that well. So the way I've set mine up is I also use an add-on program to Train Controller called Smart Hand. So Smart Hand is a IP-based application that sits on either a mobile phone tablet or a separate PC, as I do. So I don't actually have any local control panels that are wired in, like the old school days, I suppose, where you had toggle switches and the like, or even point control. It's all soft based. What I mean by that is it's all on a computer where you can use a point and click with the mouse. So you can sort of see on the screen here my various switchboards, you call them. So they're individual screens within Train Controller that you set up, and I'll briefly sort of show how to do that later on. So sort of this top left one is sort of the main screen that a dispatcher or the yard master would use. So you can sort of see the bottom portion of that below yard. That's sort of where all my trains will start and finish for an operation session. So the beauty, the different driving modes is what they call them in Train Controller. So there's 5 distinct driving modes when you set up schedules, and I'll talk about schedules in a sec. But schedules within Train Controller are not timed schedules, so to speak. There is a timetable function which I've yet to sort of utilize, but scheduling within Train Controller is routing a train between point A to B, C to D, and so on. And also you can route it back to itself as well with full collision avoidance. So what I mean by that is the occupancy detection picks it up. Train Controller protects what they call routes, which are between blocks. So all your turnouts or your points are all secured. They're all locked up. So they can't be used by another automatic train or manual train, or another operator errantly just coming in over the top and starting flicking points on the computer. So the driving modes are, which is the first one, which is trains are completely controlled by the computer. So that's full automation. With driving mode number 2 is the computer only takes control of trains when it's approaching a yellow or a restricted speed. Scenario number 3, the computer intervenes when a train is approaching a signal giving a red aspect. Number 4, trains are completely manually controlled, but if a train is approaching a red signal and the operator fails to stop the train, the computer will take over an emergency stop. And then number 5 is completely manually controlled. I use predominantly 1 and 4 for all mine, and that's just a matter of a tick of the button when you set up your schedules. At the bottom of the interface, I'll show that very soon. Now, I've been asked a few times to compare train controller with JMRI. I don't think you really can compare them. As I sort of touched on before, I don't think you have. They are vastly different in their applications. They obviously control trains ultimately. However, one you can do obviously JMRI. You use your JavaScript, is my understanding. You write that up to do everything what you do on train controller. So they are very vastly different in their application. Whereas train controller is more graphical when you set up your conditions and all that within your scheduling and the like. So as I said, one of the functions I'm looking into is MQTT. So thanks, Speed, for that, for making me go down that rabbit hole. And dozens of YouTube videos later, we're looking into that. So why, I've sort of touched on briefly, why train controller. As I said, I don't have the technical ability with Java to write that type of thing. And I found, as I said, train control being very graphical. I'm a very graphical type person to sort of see what, how you go about it. It's a real point and shoot type scenario. I see train controller as sort of another rivet counting arm of our awesome hobby here at Model Railroading or Model Railway. Fallen log railway is a very large layout, so I sort of needed the control base to help me to sort of run it with limited operators. As I said, use it for manual and automatic operating. So what I can do is I can set up bridge traffic within within train controller, I should say, to particularly with my passenger services when I'm running a freight service manually across the layout. I'll obviously have to look out, as you would in the real world, for other services with higher priorities and the like. So a scenario is sort of how I'll to sort of give you some sort of idea how I might run the fallen log railway is I can my layout is predominantly set up a bit like a branch line, even though I do have reverse loops on it. They don't get utilized in an operating sense. I only use the reverse loops when I'm sort of either just running trains for fun or rail fanning. So I can send a freight train out from, say, this Belair yard, and it'll end itself up in watch Barham Station. So if you're looking at that screen, yeah, the Barham Station is the very top left of the screen. So I can do that, an automatic train. So I can act as a yard master, so to speak. I'll send that train out automatically, and it'll come into Barham, and stop over the uncoupling magnet within probably a few millimeters, and then I uncouple the train. I shunt that train out, and I can send that train back to Belair Yard automatically as well. I do have the function, depending on which buttons I select, that I can also drive that train back manually. All right. I've got a short little video of sort of my layout that's running here. So, Brad, if you just want to cue that video up. So this is just some simple schedules and sort of how they interact with each other. You'll see the train control screen at the top when the video comes up. All right, cool. So obviously this is comprising of two rail cars that automatically are flip-flopping between what we call Barham Station and Lower Mitcham Station, which just sits above the yard of the Belair Yard. So this is full collision avoidance. So the way this is working is it's all occupancy detection. So it's sort of protecting the cars. So you can imagine I will run a freight service in between all this. So I have to adhere to the correct signaling and all that within the layout to make sure we don't run into trains or run through and cause shorts, so to speak, on the layout. So as I said before, it's a bit more difficult to do because I am running it. Is if I run a red signal, it'll automatically stop my train anyway. So video finished. Sweet. All right. Any questions from anyone out there so far? Give me a chance to have another sip of my coffee, Speed.
Someone wants to know, how do the DCC concepts turnout motors compared to others?
Now, I use the very basic version that doesn't have the coder within it. Quite honestly, I've had a few issues with my DCC concept ones over the years, hence why I'm starting to change them out to my tortoise motors. I think tortoise, from my perspective, are bulletproof. So I've never had a problem with them. DCC Concepts, I've also got some of their ones with the decoders as well, and I think they're a much more robust system. But I personally like the tortoise.
Second question is, are you using the bronze, silver, or gold version of train controller? And do
Sorry.
you know the main differences between them?
That's a great question. I'm using gold, so I've never really delved into what the differences are. I know there's a vast price point difference, and that's one of probably the downsides of Train Controller. I think it's quite an expensive program to buy. So I know with gold you can do a lot more complex routing within the conditions of something, and I'll show you what conditions are in a sec. So conditions within a block, or you can set up these other things called extended accessories. So it's just a more complex way you can code it within Train Controller to be able to do what you want to do.
So when you say expensive, how many DCC engines?
American and Australian ones. or European trains. It's probably one European steam locomotive in Australian money, yeah. So I think gold is, I think, about $500 to $600 American dollars, I think. So it is
That
quite
was
a
the
large
last.
undertaking.
That was the last question.
All right, lovely. All right, so what I'm going to quickly do is go do a quick tutorial within Train Controller. So I'll just quickly end this show, and then I'll bring up. So I'll re-share. You able to see that screener right there, Brad? And I've lost audio. Oh, good. You've got that screen? Okay. All right. Stop screen sharing. Let me go back. All right, that's better, I think. So you should be able to see that now. So, all right. So this is the graphical interface for.
Hold on. There you go.
There we go. Okay. So this is the graphical interface for Train Controller. It's quite. It's obviously a Windows-based program. So for Mac users out there, it's you can't use it, unfortunately. I don't know why that is, but for us PC people, we're all fine. So, as I said, Windows-based sort of interface. As I touched on before, everything I set up is within switchboards. So these are all different layers within my overall layout. So these are various screens. So this screen we're currently watching is sort of under development, which is going to end up being my dispatch side of things. So all these buttons will set off trains to various locations within the layout. I've got a sort of interface here that you can set up that shows you where on what block each train is. So with someone that sort of knows the system, I can tell you at a glance what layout we're on. So now, just briefly on this interface here, when I initially designed this, obviously I know the layout intimately because I've built it. So, but it's obviously a lot to take in. So someone would look at that screen and it looks like, there's obviously a lot going on there. So with my areas, I'm setting up, so this Barham station here, I'm setting up individual sort of what they call local panels. So this is the local panel here. So I'll just switch off the edit mode. So all these graphical icons here are all set up to help the user. So that the little square boxes are the occupancy, and there's like a name next to it. So I now know in this BS3 block, there's my rail car number 1 is actually sitting there. So rail car number 1, if you're back to that video, is that maroon rail car set. So So when a freight train will come in via sort of across the top here, and then it'll go this one is one time we'll use a reverse loop and BS1. So then I've got automatic uncoupling. So with these little icons here, I can set up uncoupling. All the signals will show where I am within the system. I've set up other little protections for someone shunting this area by this lock during shunting, which sets up locks out turnout, so you can't physically. So you've won this 103, which is right at the top end. You can't physically let another train come in and sort of run into behind it. So they're sort of briefly all the train control switchboards. So this is just quickly on the smart hand. So this is the smart hand interface, how you set it all up. So as I said, it's also a web-based server. And then when you log into the system it'll show you here what they're actually controlling. There's a messaging system within it you can set up as well. So train controller, you can run up to 7 separate DCC systems. So we'll just quickly go into how you might do that. So currently that is my setup. Obviously everything's offline. This is not my computer I'm normally running my trains on. So there's and how you sort of access your or your connected control systems. So for the LocoNet, so the Roco has a LocoNet function as well. So you sort of go into and you sort of set it up via that way. So you can sort of just go into, I'll just quickly add one, show you how to do it. There's a myriad of companies that obviously it supports. So Roco Fleischmann SU, obviously Digitrax is there. Some people just have just a LocoNet scenario. So there's a lot of modelers out there that might run their trains a bit similar to me, just purely run their track power from one system. They'll control their turnouts with another system and their signaling with another system. Not quite sure why they go into that depth, but that's sort of what some people are doing. So drawing a track plan now, it's quite graphical. So this is just a very quick track plan I drew up. So what you can actually do with your track plans is everything's, I don't know if you can probably see the little boxes there, but I suppose it's a little bit JMRI like that's in that regard. So it's all very, very square and you can't sort of draw nice sweeping curves type thing because everything's in blocks. So up there along the top here, you've got a little pencil function. So it's quickly to put track in. It's just a matter of doing whatever you want to do, following your track plan. Then you can put turnouts in. Oops, if it'll let me do it. And so that's quite, and then from there you can go in and color everything. You can, so it's fully, so up here you can color your tracks. I've got different track colors for the various power districts that I'm running. So, and then you've got a myriad other things that it's probably a bit beyond this sort of very, very quick clinic on what you can do with train control, but it's quite customizable what it looks like. So with that, you're then going into, it's quite easy to then add your blocks. So your blocks are obviously your detection units. So it's just a matter of clicking on them and then adding them then to your layout, so to speak, or your switchboard. So within that, I won't sort of go into this. I'll to sort of push this sort of clinic on a little bit quicker. So this block at the top left-hand corner here, block 160. So we're now going to add the occupancy to a block. So that's a matter of, so you've got the general tab here, and you got the maximum sort of the train length. So what that actually tells us is you can have pretty well tells you the length of the block. So train controller is very much it likes to know lengths of everything. So likes to know lengths of locomotives and also all your rolling stock. So it will calculate all that, but it's just a matter of adding all that stuff into there. And when I show you quickly how you add locomotives into the system, it will sort of become more apparent how that sort of works. So with that, you can obviously dictate what speeds you're coming in at, not speed mullers, but speed in kilometers per hour. For all the American and miles per hour people out there, you can actually change away from metric as well, so it can be inches and also miles per hour here as well. That's within the preferences of the program. So with that, I sort of name every block so I know what they refer to. So just I would never call a block 164. It's more, I know I tell my blocks by, or sorry, name my blocks by sort of location. So within that, you go into the block editor. So you'll see this little button up in here in the top hand corner. I won't go into what all these are about, but new contact indicator. So what are contact indicators? That's the first step of adding your occupancy detection modules. So with mine, obviously it's Roco, Fleischmann, LocoNet, and then it's just a matter of picking out the correct address and then plonking it in. So for all your people that are out there that run like BDLs and the like, it will pick that up, and then you just address it correctly, and then you can obviously go and test it as you go through each one. So operations, I don't use a lot of operations within Train Controller, but what you can do, you can send messages back. You can do, there's a myriad of things you can do with operations when a block is occupied, and also, so the memory side of things is sometimes with block occupancy, you can find that you can get a little bit of block flicker. So you can sort of counteract that by you can put a timed. I put like a 1 or 2 second delay on it, so it'll take 1 or 2 seconds before the block will turn off, and that sort of gets rid of that. So it's very important to have rock solid block occupancy within Train Controller because it relies on that for its collision avoidance. So Train Controller also has what we call these markers. So these markers, what they are, so this red one here is what we call a stop marker. So what a stop marker is doing is, so when a train comes in from the left-hand side here, it'll stop. So when we went back initially, so this is 200 centimeters long, or in metric terms, I can stop this train, and it's pretty well millimeter perfect. You can get it down to probably 3 or 4 millimeters, maybe, a quarter of an inch type thing. So it's quite reasonably accurate. And I'll show you a little bit later on how you achieve all that. So that's obviously 190 centimeters from the beginning of the block to the end of the block, or so when you want that to stop. So with quite a long block like this, if you don't put the next layer of marker in, which is like what they call a brake marker, what will happen is the train will come in, it'll get to 190 and it'll stop very, very quickly. So you add these other ones. So you add these brake markers in. So what these are, so at 150 meter mark, 150 centimeters, I should say, the train will start what they call ramping down. So the speed will start ramping down. This is, depending on how you want to do this, you can do this automatically, so with an automatic train. So with that, it will start ramping down, but it will start detecting sort of 100 centimeters out. So the train will start, within the Train Controller, will start preparing itself, and then over the next 50 centimeters, so to speak, it'll start ramping down. There's also these action markers, which I use a fair bit of. So the action markers that I use are normally locomotive functions, so a whistle or bell. So when a train comes into a block, particularly automatic, like to a grade crossing or into a station, whatever rules you're sort of using of the railway, you can actually detect that. And yet again, you can sort of mark that out on, let's turn that back on how many centimeters you might want. So there is occasions also within the marker settings where, depending on the part of the train that you want to do it. So most of mine are the head of the train. You can do the middle of the train or tail. And there's a formula, which I've sort of yet to really get into, which gets a bit more complex, probably well above my pay grade anyway. All right, so that's what I was going to show. Just back on blocks quickly. So the train identification, the reason why that's popping up is depending on what sort of transponding. I don't use transponding personally, purely because train controller tells me what train's in a given block, just by its graphical sort of picture. The trains here, when you start setting up train and train groups, you can actually limit what trains can go into a section. Sorry, into a block. So the way I use that in my turntable, I've got defined sections or sort of defined tracks that different types of trains can go into. So, and that sort of just so the system doesn't get confused about what's going where. All right, some block markers. All right, turnout addressings or switch addressing. So when you go in and set up your switches, so train control, I probably should have gone over that, is a myriad of other sort of types of switches or turnouts you put in there. Obviously left, right, so you can put three ways, you can put Ys, slips, doubles, single slips, and the likes. So you can just go and put them in there, depending on your track plan. So addressing is as such. So you can name all your switches, which becomes quite important for when you're doing more complex conditioning of the routes and the like. So just let me put NMRAx in there, and then I'll show you where that'll pop up shortly. So these are all run by stationary decoders, as within, I'm assuming JMRI is very similar. So the connection is exactly the same. So I'll have within my train control LocoNet, and then I'll have my stationary decoders and whatever you're addressing your switches at. So within that, it's also got a function of output configuration. So if you're anything like me, sometimes you wire them around the wrong way. And so graphically, it's showing thrown, but it's showing, practically on the layout, it's going straight through. It's just a matter of clicking these little tabs around and it'll swap it around for you so you don't have to rewire, so to speak. We won't get into those. That's something, as I said, there's many layers of different things you can do. So you can put different conditions on within train controller. So I'll just show you obviously where how that turn out. So it's important how you name them, so to speak. So these are all the turnouts that I've got, and I'll just find NMRAx one. So it's all, if I can do it. So mine are all sort of German convention because mine's more of a German-based railway. So everything's got a W in the front of it. Don't ask me to pronounce the German version of that because I don't know German all that well. Don't know it at all. So it's just a matter of you can go through and find all your turnouts, and you can add them to all sorts of complex conditioning. I'll probably show you one very quickly after this if people sort of are interested in that. Signaling is something within train controller I'm sort of just starting to get into. So like most things train control, obviously you can make it as simple as you want or as complex as you want. So because I'm running 1 to 3 eras German sort of European railways, I use all semaphores. So I have been lucky enough to meet a gentleman in Germany. It's made all these up. So within train controller, I should just show you, oops, if I can get it up. You can actually go in and change all the graphical icons. So it's all block based, and you can actually go and build your own signals and anything like that. So he's gone in and built these semaphores for me. So this is just a very basic, what they call home signal, which is a one arm, a stop and a go effectively. So within this, what I then do to get it to operate is very simple. If I can get into it, no, what's going on here? There we go. So sorry, I should go back. Within your signaling, you do stationary decoders as well. So you set up exactly as would you turnouts, and then you just obviously stationary decoder. Then you'll go to LocoNet with his arm and whatever your address is, and then you will start controlling that particular signal with that function. So how do you get them to operate? So within what I do within my system, it's not showing it. All right, so what you'll end up doing is I just, my signaling is quite simple. So this block signal here is to ensure to release it into this block 164. So I just set it up in a way that I'll then just go into the trigger of it, which is there. So that aspect is go. And then I'll just set up the routing system. So you can actually go and see the routes between all your blocks. So this one is block 165 to what they call connector B. So sorry, connector A. So what connectors are, just quickly, is so what train controller can do is, so what it's looking for, if you put a connector in, it's looking for its corresponding connector. So what it's actually done here, connector A here is looking for connector A there. So you might think, why would you want to do that? So when you start, let me just go to my main switchboard. When you start getting into quite complex sort of setups, you can sort of see my connectors I, H, G, and F refer to connectors on this switchboard. So it's just a way of linking the switchboards together via these little connectors. So that's quite a handy little tool that I use quite predominantly. So sorry, just back to obviously the signaling is, so it's looking for that block there to go to a go. And I've done exactly the same. As you said, you can go into a myriad of way you control your signaling. You can access anything you want. You can access your turnouts in certain states, blocks in certain states, and also different signals of different schedules, or however you want to run it like that. Speed, is there any sort of questions we can touch on? Because I've gone through a little bit there.
Okay, someone wanted to know, when you created the blocks,
Yep.
how do you have blocks set up for automation? Do you need additional short blocks before the ends of sidings or before a
Yep.
crossover for a computer to stop a train before running a red signal?
Yep. So that's a really good question. So the blocks I've set up here are just in its real basic form to run very basic automation. So if I'm to go over to my main switchboard and I'll pick a block that's not too, so you can put as many detectors within a block as you want. So this is one of my blocks that I've set up. So disregard sort of all these flags and all that, because they're a little bit more advanced sort of setup. But ultimately, this one's got 2 block detectors in it. So what I do with mine, I have a brake and a stop block. So within the brake block, when I was talking about sort of the ramping speed, and then it'll come into the stop block, and that's where you get your real finite or very accurate stopping distances. So there are some blocks I'll have. Let's pick the right one. I'll have 3. I think it's this one. I do have, I was trying to think where they are. I do have 3 within one block, so 3 detectors. So if you want very, very accurate stopping, you will get you need them more indicators, but obviously more indicators means more expense because you're using an extra access or an extra decoder or extra position within the decoder.
So when you say 3 indicators, that means that there are 3 sensors out there detecting.
3 sensors on that one block. Yep.
Okay.
And I'll show you how you can monitor that, because obviously when you see it graphically like that, I'll just go back to this BY1. When a train comes into that block, the whole block lights up red.
Okay.
But internally, the system is looking at which block it's actually in, if that makes sense. So if it comes in from the left to the right, it's going to hit this block first. So just take all this other stuff out of it, because this is all part of the automation side of things. But so it'll detect that block first, and then it'll do certain things, and then it'll hit this other block, and then obviously it's got ramps and all sorts on it, and then comes down to its final stopping speed.
Okay, and if you draw a block like you have by dot out there,
Yep.
how far does it go to the left and right on that purple bluish track?
Okay, I'll go back to this one where it's a bit easier to see. So, um, okay, so what train controller doesn't rely on turnouts being detected by block occupancy. So none of my turnouts on a hole as my rule, I have detection in it. So that block will basically go from A to the corner of this block here.
So you cut the turnout loose and power him by
Yep.
himself.
Correct. Yep.
Okay,
Yep.
and then
So
like
I'll
in
just
my
run.
case, the turnout is part of that block. So how would I then draw the?
How you draw? Okay. What you can then do is if you go, we'll go back into the block. You'll go in here. You go back to the general tab. See, you've got this record tab. So this is when you can now go and record individual parts or individual segments within it. So you can actually then go, see the little camera there? You can then just go and click on that and you click on it. So, oops. So that, now that turnout
Is part of
there
that block
is now a
164.
part of that block. Yep.
Okay.
Yeah. This is where, yeah, train controller, it's predominantly not set up that it needs that detection, but there are some modelers out there that do it quite predominantly. So that is one way I know of doing it. So, but yeah, there is other ways to show the detection of a given block. So I do have one up here. So this double slip switch up here, under this little BS sign here, you can actually pull the what they call the contact indicators out of a block. So this is my Barham slip switch, and it actually shows a detection. So this is one of the occasions where I will detect it. It's more to do with some automation that you get in the background. Then you can actually show it in conditions of automation.
Okay, so if you have multiple options to get a train from block 164 to 165, like it could go through 167 or 166,
Yep.
how does train controller decide which route to take?
Okay. Sometimes it can be a little bit of a random thing. However, you can set up. All right. So I'll probably just go. I've done that. Done the connectors. All right. So quite pertinent. Okay. So we'll set up some very basic scheduling. So within train controller, everything, as I said, runs. You can run trains fully manually, but I set up what they call schedules, which are, as I touched on before, not a point A to point B scenario. Sorry, not a timed sort of timetable type thing, but a sort of point A to point B. So this is my schedule system on my railway. So the one I've set up for this one is here. So how I achieved that is I'll just go back to here. So you got this little A button up here. All right. So I'll then push that, and then you'll see all the blocks go sort of a light grey color. So for a schedule to work, it has to have a start section and a finish section. They can be in the same block, as in the case of this, which I'll show you. So it is just a matter of clicking on there and then this little icon here. So that's start going to the right. And then it brings up a little, you probably a bit hard to see, but near the little signal there's a little green bar which shows that is a start block. So if I will then want to just have a schedule that loops around, like in this case, obviously it needs a finish section. So then next to that little green bar is an orange bar. So that's its stop section. So you can imagine this on a very large layout. You can then just push this, these little binoculars here, and it'll search for what available blocks are from 164 to 165. So you imagine there's a myriad of on a large layout. So you imagine if I was to do that back on my main control panel. So from there, depending on what you want to do, you can then, I normally opt to just push the little save button, and it sort of gets me out of this, what they call auto train. So then I'll go into my schedule list, which is here, and that's the auto train we'll just set up is this one here. So then I can now go into individual settings within auto train. So I normally name all my blocks. Sorry, I name all my schedules, I should say. So to give you some, I'll just go back to the naming convention. So you imagine I've got all these schedules run on my railway. It's quite important to sort of have them set up in a way that I know what they are and what they're doing. So they're all very graphical in regards to, I know this is a Nancy Cole, which is outbound, and it sort of shows you where it's coming from, where it goes to. So that's sort of my naming convention. So it'll start here, and then I can go up to here, and I can show you the endpoint on that, and it'll show you how it sort of transverses through the layout to its end location. So to give you some sort of idea, sort of scale speed from that stopping point to that start, or from that start to that stop, scale speed is probably about a 15-minute run. So it is just slowly winds its way up the hill, so to speak. So back to mine just quickly, the one that I've just made. So this into this auto train. So then you can obviously name all your blocks depending on what you want to do. Now, when I very first up, I was talking about driving modes. So here are all the modes here. So far left is sort of the fully automatic. So it's got a little computer sign, then it sort of steps down exactly what you want to do. So I use 1 and 4. So the 4 is manually controlled. So what that means is you're physically still controlling the train, stopping, starting. But if it thinks you're not going to stop at a red signal, it'll automatically stop the train for you, so you don't run any turnouts. So from there, you can set a myriad of rules within the system. So some of them I don't really use. It's some ridiculous stuff you can go into. So probably the main one I will go into is time of release. So what that actually means is, so you imagine a train, say what we're talking about here, from 164 to 165. So if that was a very vast distance of, say they're 2 meters, so 6 meters in length, you wouldn't want a train taking up all that to reserve all these blocks if you've got other trains running within the system. So when you set a schedule going, it'll reserve blocks, and nothing will be able to use that block. So you'll get gridlock effectively. So you can set up so when this train gets into block 166, it'll get to the stop marker that I talked about before, the block before release. So you can start another schedule. Obviously, it won't start it going, but it might go into block 167. So that question before about how does train controller, so it will, if you've selected another block that it can go into, it will push the train into another block if it's free to do so. So with that, so now successors are, what a successor is, I've set one up in the little test one I've done here, but a successor is basically a schedule that you can start after a given schedule. So, so in the case of this one, so for one run, it's going to go from block 164 through the sort of the sidings here, 165, and then by 164, and then the schedule will stop. What you can actually do, have the successor schedule as itself. So this NMRAx test one at the top here, and it'll just infinitely just keep going until the operator chooses to stop the schedule. So where I use something like that is I have some automatic schedules that come out of my, so this is my turntable. They'll come out of the turntable automatically. So I'll just push some of these buttons here. So a shunter will come out and it'll stop on this turntable backwards block, and then it'll stop. But then that successor will take over with a manual schedule. A little indicator will start flashing with a little remote, and it'll sound a little sound off to tell the operator there's a manual train ready to run. And then the next successor schedule goes into wherever, depending on where you want the shunt to go to shunt a train out. So that's sort of successor schedules. Where are we? All right, so this is something I'd also use a lot of. So you can have different schedules for different trains. So not all of my schedules are any train can run. So the reason I do that is so you can't send a train to the wrong location. So within my layout, I use all my trains are location based. So what I mean by that is, so we're sort of getting ahead of ourselves here a little bit, but all my different services have their own what they call a wagon set. So this one here is the Nancy train. So this is just a general freight train, which is a length of 150 centimeters. So obviously train controller likes to know, that's what I was talking about before, likes to know lengths of things. So that, depending on what locomotive that hitches up to. So if it's like a 20 centimeter locomotive, I now know, train controller will know that's 170 centimeter service going up there. So these wagon sets are only able to go to the Nancy station, which is up in this location here. So that's that one up here. So I can't send any other services up there. So the reason I do that is just so you don't send errant trains to the wrong location. Is there any questions on that?
No, but there's a bigger question about, can you set a route so all the signals and turnouts go to the correct positions and places, and then you run the train yourself?
Yep. So that's probably my bad. The way I explained that was probably not all that great. So when you set up a schedule, it automatically will set all the points or the turnouts, the signals to whatever's correct, and then you go and use this driving mode, this number 4 like I use, and you run the train that way. So it will automatically set up. So you don't need to, depending on how you're setting up your signaling, you can just use what train controller's own internal signals. So what I mean by that is, let me go back out to the bigger track plan. It's easier to see. Train controller has its own internal signals, which are these little ones here. So signaling up here within train controller, this is where it's going to get a little bit technical, but more just a graphical representation. So they don't physically control where the trains are stopping. It's these ones here. So there are quite a number of my signals that I will use. I will set up signaling using its own internal signals, which is via here. So you set up within the triggers and all that type of thing. So you can turn these little signals so you can't see them, but yeah, train controller uses its own little internal signals for its collision avoidance system. It doesn't sort of use these signals. I know that's probably, people think of why they do that, but that's just one of probably the idiosyncrasies of the system. But someone with the nous and to use the code can replicate this signal here that I've got, the semaphore, to exactly what this is doing. So it will then ultimately, the way you then set it up within the schedule, it will then set all your signals correctly without you having to touch anything effectively.
So if I have an operating session and I want 2 freight trains to go from left to right and right to left, and they meet in the middle and they do all their business, I could schedule a passenger train to run automatically by the system.
Correct.
And it would then wait for a track to go free to come past us.
Correct. Yeah. So
Okay.
so if, back on this one here, so if I'll set this schedule going in a sec to sort of show what it looks like, because it's another neat little function within train controller for sort of problem solving. So if you've got this passenger service here onto block 166, and you had then a freight train that was coming in the back of it, is now takes up 164. What you can do within a schedule as well is you can actually go into just for this schedule, and you can look at what you do within the block. So what I'll do, a lot of my passenger service, if they come up to a platform track, I can have waiting times. And then you can drill down even further, and you can have what individual trains that might wait. So you might have a schedule that uses the same trackage, but you are adding layers of conditions to it about what it can and cannot do on that schedule. So I might use, okay, so just use this for argument's sake, that it'll use block 166, but the local passenger will only use, it'll wait for 10 seconds at the station, and then train controller will count that down, and it'll set it off again. So, but then I can then go into, okay, there's only certain trains I want to do that with. So I'll then go into my commuter trains, which are all sitting in here, and I'll tell it which train I want to use that condition. So if another one, it doesn't meet that condition, it'll just keep going through as per the schedule.
Okay. We're a little short on time. I have one last question. How many trains can train controller run? If I had a humongous layout like miniature Wonderland, how many engines can I let go free?
Well, that's all. It's going to come down to how many blocks you've got. So on mine, I could probably. It's what you come down and what you're comfortable to as well. Realistically, I could probably have 20 trains running on my layout quite comfortably. Not that I've done that, but you could quite, with the number of blocks I've got and the way I've set it up, is quite comfortably, easily 20 trains. But miniature Wonderland, I would shudder think how many you could have. You could have 100 trains. So I think they do. I think they run 60 or 70 trains just alone on that. So it's what your stomach can take as well, because it's quite, when trains start running off individually, it's until you get everything sorted out, it's it's a little bit of anxiety. So do you want me to just quickly run the schedule?
Go ahead.
Yeah.
While you're talking, also tell us how many DCC systems you have connected on your own layout.
Okay, so all right, so just quickly, so I'll just run this schedule. So train controllers just quickly has this simulator mode, which is when you're offline, you can say on another computer like I'm inside, I can set up and I can then set trains going. So this is how the system would look, and I've got various tools here that I can look at to troubleshoot. So I'll explain those in a sec. So DCC Systems on mine currently, I've got one DCC that controls the track, which is the Roco Z21. Then I've also got the S88, which controls my track occupancy, but now I'm also looking at LocoNet. So I've got 3 connections running to my layout. So,
but only one for trains.
One that physically controls trains on the track. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So there's probably a limit there by either 99, like on my NCE system, or how many engines I could let loose.
Yeah. Yeah. I would think so. It's what your stomach comes down to as well. Like setting trains out randomly. There is a function within this which is well beyond this. It's called a spontaneous run. So you can actually just send a train out, and train controller will actually dictate where it's going. That's a little bit scary. I'll have used that for training, like cleaning cars. So you can sort of see. I'll just quickly explain. How much time do we have, Speed? I suppose is the next thing.
We're out of time, so
okay, that's right. I might have to come on again and show you how you put the engines in and all this other stuff. So yeah, just quickly, obviously this is what it's doing. It's just flip-flopping between the two. That signal should be working because it's got this free schedule. You can sort of see how this purple line here is the collision avoidance scenario. So it's now locking that route between here, between the two blocks. As I said, I haven't set any rules on this one, so I've kept it very, very simple. And this interface down here is just I set up the interface or the rule. Sorry, the successor schedules within it. So you can go out to one more level. You can go out to individual exactly what everything's doing. This is probably something you would like, Speed. What everything's doing. So what switches you're turning on. It's telling me it's turning on blocks and it's reserving routes, and you can sort of go through. If you've got issues with some more complex routing of trains, you can actually go through and you can actually pick up, okay, well, it shouldn't be doing that, shouldn't be turning on that contact indicator at this given time. So it's sort of more of a fault finding. So that's, the amount of information just on that block there, or that schedule running there. So this live interface here is obviously the way you run your trains. The software, I use the controllers. All the trains are set up here. You can just go in and select that. That's the simulator mode. And then you can go into individual blocks and work out what a given train is doing within how it's firing off the stop blocks and the like. And this is how you pick up when you divide the blocks into 2 or 3 different sensors. You can see graphically which sensor it's firing off. If you're getting some miss, you've addressed them incorrectly. So that's a very, very brief overview. I know we've probably been going 50 minutes or so of Train Controller. It's a phenomenal piece of software, I find. It's very graphical, which is sort of why I like it. As I said, I'm not very good at the coding side within Java, but
And lots of debugging on one screen.
You can do it, yep. And I quite often will use that, and I'll send that to my friend from a live layout. I'll send that to my friend in Germany, and he'll help me with the debugging. So you can actually just saves it into a notepad, and they can actually send that as a document
Cool.
with it. So that's a very good piece of kit. But the whole simulator thing is quite good. You can actually, as I said, this is not the computer I normally run my trains on. You can actually run it in the perfect world. So obviously this is assuming that all your block occupancy is rock solid, all your points are rock solid in regard how they're firing or how they're switching. So I'm getting to the point I'm pretty 95% happy about my block occupancy now. I've sort of gone to some LocoNet side of things. I was having some issues with some ghosting in some blocks for whatever reason. I just couldn't narrow down why it was happening. But I've got rid of that now, so I'm much happier.
Cool. So thank you very, very much. I definitely see episode 2 coming up, where you're showing us a little bit more, because you got plenty of interest here in the audience. Good. And maybe you get a cut or a half price upgrade by doing all this marketing.
Not with Mr. Frywald. No, he wouldn't do that. But that's for another day.
Thank you, Dazzy.
No worries. Thank you very much. Hope I didn't bore everyone too much.
I guess we will switch over to 2 slides and then bring Jordan in.
Do you need me?
Martin, you have to unmute.
You're live, Martin.
Yeah, right. Okay, now I'm pushing buttons on my new headset and I can't work out. Hey, am I live now?
Can you
Oh,
hear Martin?
I snuck into Gordy's office. I've taken another trip up to Orkney, and we'll see if he notices. Anyway, we're running behind schedule, and I have to apologise for that because I've been flapping my gums with Dazzy. I'm totally enthralled by that train controller, and I actually had the software here that I bought about 10 years ago, and I've never used it. So I'm going to give that a really good workout. But anyway, our next guest, without further ado, all the way from the USA with some great footage and rail fanning shots, is Jordan. So I'll hand it over to Jordan and I'll disappear.
Hi, everybody. How are you guys doing tonight? Tonight we're looking at freight cars. It was something that was brought up in the last clinic I did about, well, do you have any photos of freight cars? And as Gordy and Martin and Brad and even Speed knows, yes, I have quite a few. So we're going to go through, and for whoever is hosting, if they have any questions, stop me and ask it right away so we can see what's going on. So again, if you notice, there are many different freight cars. And even on this slide, notice on this gondola, it's a former Southern Railway car. You can tell by the painting where they painted it out, and it's been painted a different color, but the letters are starting to change, are starting to show through, ghosting at least. So the next one would be I started with flat cars because flat cars are one of those interesting loads you have. And notice the rail. This is a 60-foot flat car, but the rail length is probably about 55 feet. But notice how they got it strapped down. This is something you can do to improve your models. Put your ratchet strap floats down. And again, if you look through, notice the little details like the speed when we were doing our sound check. Notice that there's a hand holding what looks to be something, maybe a grain or something. And then the weathering on cars, that's another thing, is look back here on this hopper car. You got where the streaks are running down on this side, but not all the way down in the back. Now, everybody likes these interesting loads on freight cars. And these are former military tanks that have been used for bombing practice. And this is on Norfolk Southern. We get them every once in a while that come up through here. But look at how they got them chained down. They got them chained here and here. And look at the flat car. It's not your normal four axle flat car. There's six, and there's six axles on each of these cars, and they're heavy duty. And then tractors. Tractors are something people don't think about. But yeah, you can get tractors and put them on. But notice, these are actually the 8-wheeled versions of a tractor where you have more, the 4 wheels in the back. And notice that so they're not a wide load, they attach them here. They put the loads in the center, so you can only get 2 of these tractors per flat car, compared to these where they're the standard John Deere tractor, and you got where you can put multiple you can get 3 to a car. And this is I want to say an 89-foot flat car. But again, we continue with the interesting loads. And this car, it's a car that's not interchanged. It's out of interchange service, but it's still being used as a car to transport locomotive trucks in this case. They're used this is up in Waterloo, Indiana, and this car I do know is still in service. It runs between Elkhart, Indiana and Altoona, Pennsylvania, and they ferry locomotive trucks. And something I found out recently is the little yellow dot here is a symbol for Norfolk Southern that this car is out of interchange service. And it's a 40-foot flat car, but it's still being used. This was taken in 2017. So railroads are very resourceful when it comes to older rolling stock. And then you get specialized pieces of flat cars like this one. Norfolk Southern has several of these, and what they are used is they're used to transport all the stuff you would need for a switch. Everything is packaged on there, and you have an entire switch here, mainline switch here for them to do prefab. Now, this was taken in January of this year, and it's a Caterpillar construction piece of equipment. And if you notice, it's right near the head end of the train. It's what they call a high and wide load. And on here, there was an interesting story behind this because we were photographing it, and the train actually had a heritage unit as the lead locomotive. But they pulled up to a bridge, they stopped, the conductor got off, and they took the train across at like 5 miles an hour because they really weren't sure if the piece of equipment was going to fit. And they stopped, conductor climbed back on the car, rode it across, and then climbed back up to the engine. But that right there is operations you can add to your layout. And again, look at the flat car. It's really weathered, it's really worn. But it's one of those things that can add operations. Now, this isn't a high and wide load actually at all. It's piping. But we get a lot of this through Hamilton, Ohio. And if you notice how they got their piping, you got one strap going all the way over, and then you got each of the straps that are ratcheted down to a certain level. They got them all the straps interlocking so that the pipe load will not shift. So this is another, I want to say this was a 60 or 89 foot flat. I'm not really sure on that one. But here's another load you can model. You take some styrene sheets, it would be a couple nights, but you can get this nice look of steel load. And again, look at the flat car. It has that bow where they've loaded the car. And here's another type of car. This is a bulkhead flat, a short bulkhead flat. But notice again, the loads aren't centered or look uniform. Each load's a little bit different. And look at the graffiti where it's running down. It's running down here and here where the straps are. And over here, there's some. Each freight car has a little bit different look to the weathering that if you're starting out, go out and look at your photos of freight car. Go out and look at freight cars because you'll be surprised about how many variants there are. Again, and this is an 89-foot flat car. And these are F-150 truck frames. But look at how they're stacked. Look at how they're strapped down. These are, I believe, specially used on the railroads to haul the truck frames. Now we get to intermodal. And intermodal, big thing. You go out to the railroads today if you're a modeler, and you see intermodal trains everywhere. And the shipping container. There's so many different types of shipping containers, but notice there's two types. One's domestic and one's what they call steamship containers. These are steamship containers, and they're 40 foot in length maximum. However, you notice right here denotes how long the car, how wide the well is. So this is a 53-foot well car. But notice, it says B, not A, and there's a C in the middle. The B here is showing that the handbrakes are on this side of the car. And one thing I actually learned recently is that you will always have an odd number of wells, and that's because you will have you'll have an even number of wheel sets. But again, look at the containers. Intermodal trains are very colorful. And so if you look here, you look here, and here's the A end of the car, meaning that whole set was a 3-pack. So you had 3 different wells for each of the car. But if you look here, you got single. So it's just one single well car. And you got where the container, this is a 53-foot container. You can tell because of it's got the extensions on both ends. And plus, if you notice, it's overhanging. That's how, if you have a larger container, you always put the larger container on top of the smaller container. Because right here is where the pins that hold these sit. And the other thing, look here at this right here. You have a different style of well car. You have an outside bracing well car. That's what I've been told is the older style. And again, notice that this is it says it's a 53-foot container in a 53-foot well car. Most domestic containers are starting to become the 53-foot containers. And the other thing, again, how I brought up that it's colorful. Look at the differences that you can spot besides the top container being blue, which is special cause container. You got this one being a high cube, meaning that it's higher up than a regular C container. In fact, all 4 of them are in this photo. So I decided to also include an empty flat car, but notice it still has the places where they sat the load on. And in this case, it looks like railroad ties. But notice that it has this arch going over. And this arch means that they call it a hog back. But also notice, the handbrakes aren't mounted up here. They're mounted down here on the ground. So you can now stand, unlike this car where it's mounted up on the side of the car. That way loads can extend all the way to the end of the car. And notice the ratchet straps, where the ratchet straps for this are hung. And center beams. Center beam flat cars are another must for most modern railroads. And center beams, there's several different types. But look at the loads. You got where you can do the wrapping. There's unwrapped ones that I have. But this is one I've seen recently, and this is the first time I've ever seen this. This is drywall. And what I like is how they've wrapped it up. But if you notice over here, it looks like somebody wrapped it a little too hard and might have broke the car. But notice, look at this car. This is what they would call a full bulkhead flat. And modern modelers, you see the reflective striping, the reflective markings. It's a must-have for today's railroads. They were mandated in oh, I want to say 2004, 2005. And even locomotives have them. But notice here where they've strapped it, it's blocking part of the number. Now we get into covered hopper cars in general. And yes, it's a Milwaukee road car. This was shot in 2017. And notice here, the INTX, not an NS or a CXXT or a UP. This X here means that it's a private car. It's not it's not owned by a railroad. It's owned by a private customer. Most likely this is a grain elevator or a leasing company. But look at the car. Look at how covered hoppers. I hear people talking about, well, covered hoppers are all the same. You got covered hoppers like the blue one back here. And then you got covered hoppers like this. Now, when they were new, they were probably used for grain service. But nowadays they're used for hauling stuff like potash, especially these cars. These cars were used probably to haul potash. And this is more likely plastic pellets because of the design of the car. And and then right here, very simple modeling for a modeler, beginner modeler practicing weathering. But right here was a plaque that said America's Resourceful Railroad, and it's rusted off. And then over here, on the older cars, you'll find them. There's a tag that will show that they call it an AEC tag, I believe is what they called them. But basically it's like your barcode. The car would go past, it would scan it, and it would pop up into a system. A very early way of showing where cars were computer-wise. Rock Island. Rock Island's a major one we get through the Cincinnati area. Again, notice the cars riding higher than, and same as this one. But notice there's not a lot of graffiti on these cars. It's faded, but you're starting to show that these cars are faded, but you can find cars without graffiti. And again, there's that tag. Now, this is an interesting car. This was a train for potash. And potash is a material that's used to make fertilizer and other stuff. But we get unit trains of these in Cincinnati. And this is a former Rio Grande car. Again, it's a 3-bay hopper, like the other ones I've showed. But look at how they did the weathering. You've got a car that's pretty much bright orange that's been weathered down. And then, if you notice, this car was the car that I wanted the photo of. But then I noticed right here, look at the rust on this, and look at where they've repatched the car at one point with the original green of the car. Then they came back and they repatched it again because it probably went to a different owner, but they left the X and they left their number. And notice the reweight stencils on this. There's so many years you have to reweigh a freight car. And right here, you can see they call these re-railing jacks. Basically, if the car would flip over, I've always been told that those are there so they can pull the car right up with chains. And the spilt load, where they were loading the car and it spilt over somewhat. This is another cool car. Toledo, Peoria, and Western. There's that tag again. All freight cars had them. But the fun part I like about this is that people always try to get their decals looking perfect and straight. You don't need that. That's sitting at a slant. And again, a lot of these cars are going away because they're hitting their 40-year limit. Basically, freight cars have a limit that they can only operate for so long before they have to be replaced. Otherwise, you would still have freight cars from the 50s and 60s still running around. But they've decided, I want to say back in the 70s, that there was a limit to how long a car could operate. But again, notice that the side seal comes all the way down to where it's covering a lot of this of the hopper bay. And reweight stencils. The car's been patched a different color. And the rust. That car's been completely repatched, just noticing that. They patched out a whole bunch. And the other cool thing about covered hoppers is you got so many that were owned by little co-ops like Clem Co-op Grain in Clem, Iowa. And notice that this is actually a short line railroad because there's no X. But also notice, they started putting this bracing here, and I was told because it was to do with loading. It was to help stabilize the car. But notice that the co-op part is completely clean, minus the graffiti, whereas the rest has the stripe, has grime and weathering running down it. And another one, as unit coal trains are going away, you now get the older unit rotary dump hoppers are being converted into hauling different materials. Like this is, I believe, was told to me that this is what they call dirty dirt, basically from contaminated sites like former industrial sites and stuff like this. But look at the car. The red over here would indicate that this is the rotary coupler part of a car for when it was used in unit coal train service. Notice that it's been patched out, and notice the hazardous material tags, and there's that ever-present barcode. The railroads don't use those anymore, but a lot of freight cars got them. And also notice the tarp. There's a tarp underneath these cars, on this car, making sure that it wasn't, whatever was in there was not leaking out. And 2-bay hoppers, used for hauling sand, used for hauling a lot of stuff, smaller stuff, cement, basically heavy bulk items that will really be a whole heavy load. But again, notice that it's been marked out. And notice the design. This is an older style 2-bay hopper compared to the newer ones that are running around. And here was a car that I found interesting. So the Chicago Northwestern bought tons of their grain cars because they were a Granger road. But notice that the buzzsaw, as they call this logo, you can see the Northwestern, and it was a yellow car. You had green, yellow, and I've seen white Chicago Northwestern cars. But look at the rust. It's a simple job, and there's not a lot of graffiti for a new modeler. A new modeler could do this.
Jordan, quick question.
Yes.
Do those cars have to run empty the return trip?
So what a lot of railroads do is they try to get cars reloaded on their way back. But these Potash cars typically will go back empty because typically they are in a unit train.
And another question, do we have some idea of what percentage of cars did not get repainted in their new owner's colors? Like, I assume this is a Chicago Northwestern car
yeah,
that belongs to someone new now.
Yeah, so when you buy a rail car, I would say it has to be at over 50% of freight cars are repainted or not repainted. I'd say almost probably 85% of freight cars that are new are not repainted, that are bought by a secondhand.
Okay.
It's a high number because paint costs money, and it costs a lot of money to paint a freight car. And it's not like even locomotives, but that's a whole nother story. But this is a car that's earning revenue. You don't want to cut off your revenue to repaint a car. So they just patch the car out like they've done here, and they send it off on its way. And sometimes you'll get cars that were bought by the company, like this car right here. Notice it's not been patched out. But the rust is interesting. I mean, look at this. The splotches here. And the other thing is, look at the trucks. They look completely different than this. This is what they call a cylindrical hopper. And these are all in potash service. These cars right here, this was a unit potash train. And again, they've been bought out. The tag was here. But there's that bracing again, and the car's really rusted over here and here. But it's not as bad where that bracing runs. Here's an interesting car. It's a car that I caught a few years ago in the same train, actually. But after they sold it off, because there's that patch, some car owners will match the paint perfectly. Other cars owners, not so much. But there's that ever including tag. But I believe this is one of the photos that I took. I photographed at one point 100 car unit potash train on both sides because I wanted to get as many pictures of these cars, because it was a bunch of the older style the older style hoppers and road names that will eventually disappear. Boston and Maine, we started seeing these a lot more recently. And here's the cool thing. Notice here, company bought MWCX, which is a company out of Minneapolis, I believe, has started buying newer 2-bay hoppers for fracking sand, glass, sand for glass manufacturing. But we get these Boston and Maine cars quite frequently through here. But notice you don't have to go, oh, I got to match it to the Boston and Maine blue of this hopper. When you're patching out a freight car, it's whatever color you need to patch. And I've seen it as obvious as white on a black freight car and bright red on a tank car. But this car, it's another one of these cars that's going to be reaching their 40-year limit here soon. And this car, Burlington Northern car, it's not been patched. It's still a Burlington Northern Santa Fe car. But notice, it looks pretty clean except for a little bit of graffiti here. And there's actually, if you look at freight cars, there's a lot of freight cars where railroaders have come up and marked on the side of the car in chalk or in a paint marker little notes to each other. So that started in the 1800s and have continued on since. And another Soo Line hopper. This is now Canadian Pacific, but because Canadian Pacific owns the reporting marks for Soo Line, for the Soo Railroad, they can just keep the car the same. That's why you'll see out on CXX, you'll see B&O cars or C&O cars, because it's easier just to keep the car in the same reporting mark. But these cars were used in grain service. Now they're used in potash service. Here's another one of those cool cars. A lot of these little co-ops have sold off as they got bought out. A lot of the cars were sold off and purchased by leasing companies. And notice that it's been reweighed. Notice that all the information's been updated. But it's just one of these cool cars. There's going to come a point in time where you're not going to see these cars, and people need to have pictures of them to model, just like people did in the 60s and 70s. They took pictures, and now we're using those as reference photos. And again, in OKL, notice on this car and this car, the ribbing on the sides of the cars are different. This one's more spaced out than this one, and there's that bar, there's that rib going across the top of the car. And again, it's a clean car. It's dirty, but you could model it easily. And the Canadian cars, a lot of people have heard of these. These are the cars that the Canadian government back in the 70s and 80s came in, and they basically said, we need to purchase. The Canadian government wanted to get rid of the 40-foot boxcars that the Canadian railroads were using. And they determined that it would be easier for the Canadian government to purchase a ton of these cars. And while I never got a lot of them, we used to get them through on a regular basis, and now they're starting to go away because the Canadian government is buying brand new cars for potash service. But these were originally used to haul grain, and now they're being used to haul potash. But notice the differences in the paint schemes. Each one was painted for a Canadian province that produced grain. And I forget what this one was. Might have been Saskatchewan. Or you got this one that was just showing that it was a car that the Canadian government had bought. And again, each of these cars have this little reporting mark. I mean, not reporting mark, reflector tape. And look at the weathering on this, where you can see where the car was welded. The sides of the cars were welded, and grime and stuff ran down the side of the car. Now, potash cars. This is what the newer versions are. They're replacing the older style cars, and this isn't a faded photo. These cars are salmon orange or salmon pink. When they fade to this color, and it is a light pink, as you can tell down here by the photo. But what's interesting about these cars is Canadian government, the company that purchased all these was thinking, and these cars are not 40 foot or 50 foot or even 60 foot. They're 39 foot. And what they determined that if you take these cars and you spread them out over, say, 100 car train, by the time you get done, you will have enough room for one more car. And that's one more car you can load up with goods. And as you can tell, look at this is a newer car. And I know up in the Canadian province, they got potash cars that are bright blue. I have yet to see them, but I've been told they're actually really cool looking cars. And notice, you don't have to have all the same type of car on a freight train. This photo was taken, and notice there's another one of those potash cars, was taken in the same train that these cars were taken in. Railroads don't just have one type of car for a train. It's spread out over a manifest freight. And I have no clue what reporting mark this car was. I almost have to wonder if it was a grain car, a granary, a co-op car. But notice the road grime and these cars. A lot of these cars that show up on NS are being used to haul Clayland. And Clayland is a product that is produced down in Georgia. And it's used in ceramics, papers, a whole bunch of different applications. But we get these cars a lot through Cincinnati that are showing that have, and this is actually a cleaner car, but you'll see cars that are completely white from the Clayland dust. Now we're on to gondolas. Or we're still in the hopper cars. I think I included this. But notice this right here. Nice little dent. And a friend of mine who worked for DJ Davis, Jurgens, and I cannot remember what Joseph. Told me that what happens with this is that they're trying to load as much scrap as they can into these cars because these are scrap gondolas hauling scrap metal. And what'll happen is they'll get these cars and they'll clamp. The scrap loaders will grab the side of the car and they will push down, trying to push stuff down in. And that's where these dents and dings and stuff comes from where people are overloading these cars. And in fact, I've seen cars, I wish I had my camera at the time, where they put a nice hole in the side of the car where they punctured through with the claw that was loading the scrap. Wood chip cars. These cars, wood chips are light. You can put a lot in a large hopper car. These were, I want to say, 60-foot hopper cars, but they're tall. They're taller than a normal 50-foot box car. But notice again, the Family Lines logo is starting to show out, but it's a different company. These look to be all former Family Lines, Louisville and Nashville, Seaboard System, and one other railroad. Maybe the Georgia Railroad, I believe. Now we get to boxcars. And again, boxcars were one of those cars back in the 70s that every short line had them. So you had all these different cars that had, we'll say, the Seattle North Coast, or one of the ones we got down through here was the Greenville and Northern. And they're still running around. They've not hit their life expectancy yet. A lot of them are getting ready to. But look at the rust where the door is dinged up. And look at the door. The doors are, I have photos of where doors are different on these cars. And again, remember how I said railroads and leasing companies will patch their car up. And so this BKTY is a Union Pacific car, and it's lettered for the Katy. And you wonder why they put a B there. Because it's not a car that was built for the Katy, and I forget exactly how they describe it. I used to know, and I'm drawing a blank. But basically, this is what the Union Pacific is doing to show that these cars are Union Pacific cars. They're labeling them for a predecessor road. A lot of these freight cars, they're 50-foot box cars. They're being used in service running down to Mexico to bring beer back. And there's actually videos of trains over in Texas and that with 100-car trains of nothing but these older style box cars with the BKTY coming out of Mexico. This was a northbound train heading into Cincinnati at that point. Now, again, notice the reporting mark. This was a railroad from the Iowa Pacific Holding Company. It was out of upstate New York. But notice the door type. It's what they call plug doors. So basically, you turn the handles here, and the door will open up, and then you slide it, and that's how you access the car. one of the things I just found out recently is that these doors, and these doors especially, are not allowed. Railroads are very, very picky about picking up cars that the doors open on, because it's a liability and a danger. And notice former Wisconsin Central car, and I like how the rust here, but really not plenty place else on this. Former Southern Railway car. I know this one because it's a Pullman car. It was a waffle side boxcar. It's now it was owned by the Norfolk Southern, and it looks like it might have been bought out, judging by the reporting mark. But notice the door. The door is a different color than this, meaning it was probably replaced at some point. And I included this one because it shows how there's several different types. You have a standard door boxcar here with a different set of ribs compared to the ones we've seen previous. And to go back to bulkhead flats, this is what a center beam flat car. This is what a center beam flat car can look like. Over here, where it looks like there's a beam and there's trusses. Or this is another type of center beam. But look at the different styles. There's the roof and it's rusting. You got the plug door. And we're here, just a Southern Pacific car, 60-footer. But it's not owned by the Southern Pacific anymore. I believe this is the Columbia and Georgia Railroad. But look at what I love about this is the Southern Pacific part's worn off completely, but it's left the outline where it was painted on. But this plug door is, again, look at the detail. You have where the latch is that you pull the door out with and then slide it. And remember how I said that cars are not allowed to be, that most railroads will not pick up a car if the door is open. What that typically means is that this door was probably slid open at some point. Somebody was trying to get in the car or try to get out.
Do those doors have to be locked?
So if they're loaded, they do. Most of the time, what'll happen is that the lock's not very substantial. You can actually pop the lock. I've heard that you can cut the lock with a pair of bolt cutters. But I've noticed that you don't see it a lot. You won't see a lot of open door boxcars. But normally what it is that the company does not have to lock the boxcar before they pick it up. The door just has to be closed. And this is a car they call a per diem boxcar. Back in the 70s, the railroads were facing a shortage of rolling stock, and so the government made a deal with made a thing where if a short line would purchase so many cars, they would get it. They would get money, and that the government would pay for half of it, and that they could earn revenue service because the 40-foot boxcars were wearing out, and it was getting to the point where the United States railroads could not afford to. The main class ones could not afford it, so they created these per diem boxcars. And there's stories of railroads owning it that had so many freight cars that if they came back to the short line, that the cars would not fit on the railroad. And high cubed boxcars. High cube boxcars are, again, that. Notice the white mark designating that this car is higher than a normal boxcar. This is a 60-foot boxcar, and it's still an NS car. But notice that it's a double door boxcar like this one, meaning that you can take this door and slide it this way. and you can take this door and slide it the other way. And rail box. Rail boxes are cars that you will see all over the place. Rail box is what it says. It's a nationwide boxcar pool. If you need a boxcar, you can contact the railroad or rail box, and they can get you a car sent. But notice the doors. The doors are different. The door is different. It's not as many ribs as some of the boxcars we've seen. And here's a case of a Class 1 railroad buying another Class 1 railroad boxcars. This right here is a high cube boxcar. But the difference is that this was a former CXX car. However, the Kansas City Southern has bought these cars. And Kansas City Southern does this quite a bit. They'll buy other railroads' boxcars because railroads will put their cars up for auction. And they use them in service for hauling like the Union Pacific does, hauling beer out of Mexico. Here's another one of those waffle-sided boxcars like I mentioned. Look at the ribbing. This is a very interesting, and I've only seen it on this style of boxcar. The ribs are not even. But this car's painted for the Norfolk Southern. Sometimes railroads will come in and repaint rolling stock. Your Class 1s typically will do this. Or it could have been that the Southern had the order, and when they merged with the Norfolk and Western, they decided that they were going to paint the cars in Norfolk Southern. This is the older style one. The older style logo NS used. And this car. Not sure who the railroad is. I looked it up and I really didn't find much information. But if you notice, it's simple. You could do this one. You have the rust on the ends, and it would be a car for a beginner, a very easy car. You could forget the graffiti. But notice the reweight dates. Do we have any questions, Speed? So
There's a question here about, has PSR created a surplus of cars?
yes, PSR has definitely created a surplus of cars. And for people not knowing what PSR is, it's precision scheduled railroading. And precision scheduled railroading has multiple things and has multiple facets to it. But one of them is that railroads do not need to have 600 of a certain type of car. They only need to have it because there's cars like Rail Box and other short lines that can provide box cars. So I know here recently there were a couple yards here locally when CXX started precision scheduled railroading that were chock full of box cars that were waiting to be auctioned off. And most of those cars either ended up as scrap because they were almost near their life expectancy, or they're still running around, like that Kansas City boxcar we caught recently. Do we have any more questions?
Well, we're running out of time, so someone wants to know if you're planning to put all these pictures on a million picture library or something, because I know you're taking a lot of these. So how are we going to make you famous by having these things online?
So my biggest thing is that I really don't have an answer for that one. But the biggest thing I do is I go out and I take photos of freight cars and even railroading, because I've learned that people don't realize that the world's changing. I mean, when I started rail photography, it was different. But my plan is to go through and put a lot of these on Flickr, which is a web hosting site, or Railroad Pictures Archives.
Cool. So Timothy, please come in contact with Cosmo, and he might
Yeah.
share all his pictures with you.
Yeah, definitely. If you need pictures of a certain car, let me know. I can find you cars close. I mean, like you were saying, Speed, I have over, I think I last checked, which was yesterday, I think I have over 10,000 photos of locomotives, rolling stock, and
Ouch.
track and pictures, and even scenery. But this is
Simon.
only a small portion of this slideshow.
So how many more slides do you have? Because we only have 10 seconds left.
Way more than 10 seconds worth. But we can do a part 2 for that,
Okay.
because definitely I can add more. I'm always out there taking photos of freight cars and stuff.
So you mind if we stop here?
Yes, we can do that.
Well, Jordan, thank you very, very much. That was just amazing how much information you can collect by simply taking the button on the camera.
Oh yeah, if you really look at it, you can find tons of information. And there's so many different freight cars out there. We definitely, next time you look at a freight train, you'll notice that there's so many different types.
Cool. So I don't think we spin the wheel anymore, but how about you put in the chat, how many pictures of cars do you have?
Okay, so welcome back to NMRAx Studio 1. We've got Pat here all the way from Queanbeyan, just outside of Canberra, the nation's capital. And it's good to see you back again, Pat. How's the weather down there?
Yeah, no, it's good today. Thanks, Marty. It's 24 degrees, so yeah, nice and warm.
Oh, it's about 32 and about 80% humidity here at the moment. So,
Yeah, too hot.
anyhow, Pat's also the president of the Canberra Monero N-Scale Group, and he's going to give us a bit of a chat about how he approached his small, modest layout and getting back into N-Scale again. So, without any further ado, I'll hand it over to Pat.
Yeah, thanks, Marty. So I've put together today just a video showing my smaller layout. We've always seen people do big ones, but I thought it'd be interesting, and a lot of people always ask how you start in the hobby. So I just put this video together, and I've been wanting to do it ever since I got onto Facebook and my daughter put me on it. So I've been photographing the layout throughout its generation. So just let the video roll and we'll go from there.
Hi, I'm Pat Gagle. I hail from Queanbeyan, New South Wales, Australia, a small town next door to the Australian national capital, Canberra. I've noticed that a question often asked by people new to the hobby is, where do I start? In my case, where do you restart at 48? As a result, my presentation today is about how I returned to the hobby after discovering girls, buying a house and raising kids at the age of 48 with just a small one, 1.7 by 0.7 metre layout. I also hope to demonstrate how much you can fit into a tiny space to develop your skills to set a firm foundation for a future dream layout. Like everybody else, I suppose, I spent my time going through track plan books and designed up my dream layout in a software package called SCARM. On review, it also appears that I had a desire for a turntable. This one is a 3-level layout, which I really liked at the time and still has some appeal for me today. The next layout was my preferred layout for a while, which included a turntable, of course, a dog bone, and the Fraser River Canyon out the side, with a small port at the bottom. What more could you want? Despite all this, I finally decided I'd go with a really simple oval track plan out of the Pico book, Layout 1A. I was never excited about not seeing all of the layouts, so rather than using the divider, I decided I'd utilise a cutting and road bridges so the trains were partly obscured from view as they looped around. This is the end result. Well, almost. There is still some bare baseboard, but the track plan for all purposes is the same. I got back into it by buying a small Bachmann Southern Prairie train set. As a young person I could never afford steam trains, so this small 060 was very appealing. Following that, while up in Sydney for work, I also purchased a 2662 undecorated mallet locomotive. Little did I know at the time, but it had DCC. I thought it just meant that on low power you got a flashing headlight. How nice. I've also been immensely fond of bridges, so on that same visit I bought a bridge. These photos are from October 2015. The layout started as loose track on the air hockey table, where it still lives today. Not much air hockey got played then, nor does it now. I highly recommend starting with loose track and running trains. It helps enormously to work out what is going to work for you. The other aspect of this simple layout is that I liked is that it always allowed me to finish the day running trains. That aspect really appealed to me. Another early acquisition was a Kato E8 Via set. I had fond memories of Via trains as one used to rumble past my school every morning at recess. Jason Schron of Rapido Trains also mentioned recently that he had made a Via Loco when he was 13, as depicted in the version of Model Railroader magazine. And here is the HO Loco sitting alongside the Intermountain N-Scale Via F7 locomotive. Anyway, new train, new siding or spur. the layout needed to grow again. And here is a lifelike F40 Amtrak locomotive and Buckman Bud cars. I always really liked these, but the Bud cars have to be the worst running carriages ever. It was time to get it onto its own board, so here it is fitted to the air hockey table in its new home in the dining room. Things were starting to get serious. Starting on the simple 1A Pico track plan, it wasn't lost on me that there was a double mainline version in Design 1B. With my experimentation with various sidings or spurs, I soon realised that I could quickly incorporate a double mainline into my layout, which I did. And in time, I found that Pico number 1 and 2 curves meant that if I could get my trains to run on this layout, they will run anywhere. There is not a single locomotive or piece of rolling stock that cannot make the points or curves. Is having a supportive partner. This is demonstrated in this footage where I decided to simulate ploughing snow off the main line with makeshift snow. Anywho, we digress. Conscious by this point that railways, despite my interest in passenger services, needed an industry, needless to say, another spur line emerged to support a brewery. It didn't take long to realise that the spur line also supported the opportunity for a reversing loop with minimal additional track work. Happy with the bones and features of my layout still on loose track, I was finally able to start on the scenery. This is June 2016, a full 9 months since I bought that train set. Of course, I still needed to check things by running trains. At the same time, I decided that everybody had a river. I wanted something different, so I committed to modelling a swamp. To build the swamp, apart from the bridge, I needed some low-level trestles. For this, I tried 3D computer modelling and shapeways, which for a custom-designed structure was very affordable. My swamp followed some watermarks on the baseboards. For this, I used Woodland Scenic Magic Water. It worked a treat, however I was going to rue making the 2 different depths. In hindsight, I should have obtained the change in perception of depth with paint colour. By doing 2 different depths, I did not anticipate at the time how much this stuff shrinks. Needless to say, the last coat left a step between the 2 different depths of water, even though I poured them in the depths specified. To resolve the issue, I used water effects to simulate wind-blown surface waves on the swamp that also camouflaged the step, but still reflected trains crossing the bridge. I also decided I wanted bulrushes, which I had not seen any. I bought some cheap bushes, cut them down to size, I think they were HO scale, then inserted some thin wire with a glob of glue, followed by paint. I also fitted a skyboard at the back. I wasn't too creative with this one, purchasing the extra large Pico painted backdrops. Again, what a transformational change to the layout. If you have not yet done this to your layout, you really need to do it. It really transforms the layout. Since then, a club member has shown me how to paint my own. Again, need to run trains to make sure it all works. Here we have a Canadian Pacific SD40-2 snoot nose. The sign beside the track is also one of the things that came with the Buckman set. At this point, my wife was getting quite concerned that I was always talking to my passengers. She pointed out that I didn't have any. Oh well, I had to fix this minor omission, so I started on the platforms. A problem emerged at this point with the platform roofs that sat alongside the layout, getting damaged when re-railing trains and adding or removing rolling stock. This resulted in the inclusion of a Perspex edge screen. I got somebody who works with Perspex to make it with proper polished edges and glued return panel. Magic. I always envisaged the main station building, something as elaborate as Union Station or the equivalent, would be in the foreground in front of the platform, beyond the edge of the layout. I also gained a heap of passengers to prove to the wife that I had passengers. Again, this was something I saw under the layout, which I thought was very effective. Around the same time, I discovered that the MDF board was sinking in the middle. At this point, I decided to add a subframe. The framing had the added benefit of providing a face to fix the Perspex screen. I have always been fascinated by lights. Now the 20th century had given us LEDs. Here are the first 2 LED yard lights purchased off eBay. These quickly spread to lighting buildings. The small LEDs gave me an idea for my platforms in N-scale. I had never seen convincing area lights for platforms that I could find, and they always looked oversized. I found these tiny pre-wired 1mm by 0.5mm LEDs on transformer wire. I tried ones without wires, but at this stage my soldering skills weren't developed enough. The shorter passenger platform was my guinea pig, having only 2 LEDs to see if my idea would work. You can see one of the square solid styrene tube riser concealing the thin transformer wire. You can also see the Pico platform stairs, which look like they connect all the platforms via a pedestrian tunnel. Some other shots of the layout. You will note that the powerhouse now has smoke emanating from the chimney. Again, another technique that I read about but never tried, using teased cotton wool. People seem to love cotton wool smoke on the steam trains at shows as well. About this time, I also finally got one of those fancy static grass applicators. I picked this area to try it out. I had always been amazed with rails in concrete work areas. The engine shed became my victim to try this out. I chose to use styrene placed between the rails with suitable clearance for point operation and wheel flanges. You will also note my use of marker pens to mark the expansion joints in the concrete. From here, I extended a boardwalk across the tracks to the powerhouse with my little character traversing the tracks. Unfortunately for him, he occasionally gets boxed in by coupled rolling stock in the yard. I also saw people use disused tracks, so decided I would try and do one for the old coal line to the powerhouse, which had since been converted to gas. I think it turned out pretty good. Again, a very simple technique. By this stage, I virtually had all my baseboard covered. I still had this empty front corner of the layout though. What could I possibly do with that? I had always liked the idea of modelling a highway. My solution was to create a highway traversing the corner so I didn't have to build too much, and again try out some different modelling techniques. This fitted nicely with the idea of a very large station, one of the most ornate you could ever imagine, sitting out the front of the layout. Of course, the highway and fence also provides great access for train spotters. Like vehicle tyre marks, shrubs and vehicles were also added to complete the scene. To continue the lighting theme, I discovered these cars with 4 LEDs for the tail lights and headlights that could take 12 volts without the need for resistors. I grabbed these and some buses that were similar. Unfortunately, the trucks didn't have lights, so I had to sacrifice a car to steal its LEDs for the trucks. The operation was a success. Here, in another view of the effect, it is now April 2017, almost 2 years since I had bought the train set. On reflection, I think working on small areas as the ideas come to you is very successful and has added to the detail. To do it in any larger areas would, in my mind, lead to potentially bland and boring expanses of scenery. But we aren't there yet, folks. There is still more. My lovely dog had loyally sat at my feet during all this time as I modelled away. This all changed one day when my daughter lifted him to see the trains. What can I say? That was it. He's been hooked ever since. This is him in his favourite train watching position on my lap. He has only got worse since he will not come to bed unless we have run trains every night. His noises feature in all my videos from this date. You can no longer run them without him appearing, and if he isn't around, he appears very quickly. trains were still arriving. Here we have a Canadian Pacific SD90 43 Mac complete with Golden Beaver. Yet another birthday present. What would our families buy us for birthdays and Christmas if we weren't into trains? My birthday is just before Christmas. By this stage I thought I was just about done. I came across control panels and noted a lot of layouts on the internet with signals, albeit connected to point motors. Could it be possible? Did they need to be automated? While it could be very nice, I decided that no, they didn't need to be automatic, and I could be that computer that could change the signalling to match the set track arrangement. So my poor little tortured layout got signals, although the control system, me, was a little dodgy and unreliable at times. I started by fitting dwarf signals to the gantries, as I thought these would be the hardest to incorporate the signals on. I abandoned and painted over the old disc and mounted the dwarf signals alongside. Here is the control panel. It is styrene stuck to clear perspex and painted. Turned out fairly good. The yellow and white squares are switches to turn off power to the engine house tracks. The panel also controlled the layout lighting and the obligatory welding lights in the engine shed. And here is the panel mounted to the front of the layout. I must have just finished wiring it as there are no trains on the layout. They're probably all on the dining table out of view in the foreground. Here are the signals in operation. I also discovered at this point how poorly LEDs photograph and their tendency to flare with mobile phone cameras. More running trains and the Canadian Pacific SD90 and the CN SD42W Expo 88 loco. Damn pesky train spotter is still at the fence. That guy has a problem. A New South Wales Candy livery 442 weaving its way from the platform track to the runaround and back onto the main. Here, the CNF7 running past the platform before returning to the main line for the rest of its journey. A few more pics of the train dog and his favourite train watching vantage point on my lap. This photo shows a couple of late additions to the layout. Here we have a small Canadian trackside station for the adjacent engine house workers to get to work. I've also popped a Dutch windmill behind, reflecting my family cultural history. It is about December 2017 here. All of this was achieved in about 2 years. Without further ado, I like to finish each and every session with running trains. So here we go with a bit of rail fanning. We have a VIA train on the outer being hauled by the E8. On the inner is a fleet of 8 Amtrak Metro liners. I only had one of these in HO when I first started. I now have 9 with 2 power units that allow me to run 2 consists of 4. I'd love to convert these to DCC one day, however I'm not confident that it's an easy mechanism to convert. This is a New South Wales Government Railways 48 class locomotive. Behind it are some 4-wheel brass cattle wagons. Since coming back to the hobby, making brass models is always something I wanted to learn. Behind there are a few open 4-wheeler K-wagons. This train is hauled by a Candy 48 class locomotive number 4848 and a Tuscan 48 behind. The carriages are more brass bogied cattle wagons complete with cast and painted cows. a few four-wheel brass four-wheel cattle wagons, and some K-wagons, and a four-wheel guards van, or caboose as you call them in America. The same 48's diverted via platform 2. Two 48s coming across the bridge over the lakeside of the swamp, with four-wheel cattle wagons and some K-wagons. Here we have Canadian National C630, which comes as DCC out of the box. On the inner we have an American steamer that a friend gave to me. Similarly, the European wagons in the foreground are given to me by an acquaintance that no longer ran these trains. This is a Commonwealth Railways GM pulling a famous Australian train, the Indian Pacific, which is a tourist train that runs between Sydney and Perth. My wife told me I wasn't allowed to buy this locomotive as I had enough trains. However, she didn't say the dog couldn't buy it. Needless to say, the dog owns this locomotive. Here is a wider view of the dog's GM. He really likes it when it runs, although he has taken a liking to my sound chip Canadian National GMD1 I got for my birthday. So, paws off, dog. On the inner we have CP Rail F7 A and B unit pulling freight cars. This is one of my favourite videos. I call it Wiggle Wiggle Wiggle. A lot of model railroaders don't like the amount of movement in longer passenger cars, but I don't mind it. It's just a function of their geometries. I get all sorts of comments like, your passengers will have whiplash, and the like. For the small area, I deliberately used short points, largely because they are readily available at the local hobby store, although I do have two medium length points in the layout. They are probably only there because the local hobby store ran out of the short points. Again, a small steam train and European carriages given to me by somebody that was no longer active in the hobby. Here we have a 48 with some kit-built D-wagons, which are early day manually braked wagons with an older white metal guards van on the back. This is a New South Wales Government Railways 44 class locomotive pulling an intermodal container train. The white containers are cardboard souvenirs handed out to people who attended the NRMA Australian NSCAR convention in Canberra in 2019. Also, some cardboard Holden-wise containers. Holden was the Australian branded GM car designed and built in Australia, but unfortunately has now been wound up. Sea and Gondolas traversing the swamp, which I picked up on a trip to Brisbane, and the 48s having a go at pulling the intermodal container train. Here we have one of the Canadian Pacific SD42 snoot noses, yes I have two now, pulling a boxcar train from the inner to the outer. There is a separate DC controller for the inner and outer track and associated yards that allows two people to run the layout. I also have an adapter cord that allows me to connect NCE Dcc System to it. However, I mostly run DC. I was initially reluctant to run sound-equipped locos on DC, but they run without a problem. You just don't get all the noise functions other than the motor. Here we have on cue the two Canadian Pacific SD40-2 snoot nose locomotives pulling the commemorative Canadian Province and Territory boxcars and caboose. I also have two Badger 44 class New South Wales Government Railway locomotives. They are a later, more detailed and accurately scaled model to the early I. Bertram model. This is the same commemorative Canadian rolling stock, but they have been pulled by the commemorative locomotives that were released by Microtrains with this set. Peter Crawford in Adelaide had two sets of locomotives, so kindly sold me the A and B unit to complete my set. In front of the swamp crossing, we have two 48 pulling bogie brass cattle wagons. followed by South Australian bogeyed cattle wagons. All have cows which are cast and painted. The guards van is a GHG, again a brass kit with styrene chassis and roof. The 44s pulling in New South Wales Government Railways, BS and FS passenger cars. On the inner is some European rolling stock. Next we have the Dogs GM pulling a mixed freight and containers travelling in open gondola cars. The guards van is an Australian made 8300 full steel guards van, again built from a kit. A different view of the GM with a New South Wales 57 steam locomotive and painted cotton wool smoke pulling out the non-air braked D-wagons and a HG guards van. A New South Wales Government Railways 442 class locomotive pulling FS and BS passenger carriages and guards van. A bit like early British model trains, it was pretty rare for Australian models to have lights. The chimney for the boiler house is sitting there on the ground in its stored position when the layout is covered. Passing on the inner, the GM and some Australian petrol tankers, a Victorian fieldwork, and my favourite shot of the rear of the 8300 guards van. This is the XPT based on the English 125 class Intercity, although shorter, painted and deckled by me. This train doesn't stop at regional stations such as Myrtlefoot and that lovely yellow 8300 Australian National Guards van again. These are some New South Wales four-wheel sheet wagon Badger kits, the HG Guards van kit on the back. The Dogs GM again, followed by a 48 pulling four-wheel cattle wagons and four-wheel sheep wagons. Only one sheep wagon has sheep. More 48s, followed by louver vans, refrigerator cars, some undeckled louver vans, and the JHG guards van. Here we have an 81 class National Rail locomotive pulling an intermodal container train. On the inner we have a Pacific 482 locomotive awaiting conversion to a Canadian Pacific steamer. This is just an overview of the layout. You can see a Canadian Pacific MP 1500 in the yard, a New South Wales 45 class and a Candy 442 over the back there. Train dog again. Little did I know that the Perspex guard, apart from stopping me from accidentally wiping out my platform ruse, also doubles as something for the dog to lick. As I said before, this is an everyday occurrence in our house, normally just before bedtime. The Badger 44 class. Two 442s pulling some cement wagon kits and cattle wagons. The 44 class hauling passengers on the outer. This is a New South Wales Government Railways white metal NHG guards van, undergoing a test run before being painted and deckled. Here we have a 442 with completed wheat and cement kits, with an old white metal kit guards van, followed by the previous NHG guards van, now painted and deckled. The dog's new favourite locomotive, my Rapido Canadian National GMD1 with ESU sound. It is running here in DC and some more recent rolling stock. This is a couple of 44s pulling a train that was called the Tin Plate Train. It had 13 TLV carriages and travelled regularly from Port Kembla to canneries in Victoria and South Australia. The X's on the carriages indicate that they have transfer bogies, which means they can be exchanged at the Victorian border for broad gauge bogies to complete their trip. On the inner, the National Rail 81 class with an early resin cast wheat hopper behind, cars and white metal NHG guards van. Here we have a CP F7 A and B unit pulling a CP rail passenger car and a dummy CN F7A unit powered by a Cato F7B unit, express freight carriage and CN passenger cars crossing at the bridge. A Canadian National C630 and GMD1 mixed freight. The little CP shunter transferring rolling stock from the outer to the inner main. This is the CountryLink Explorer, which is the train that runs 3 times a day between Sydney and Canberra. The CP MP 1500 is doing its thing on the inner. This is the new Rapido Dash 8 locomotive. One is fitted with a sound chip, and the secondary one I fitted with an ESU decoder without sound. Luckily these chips have sequencers to delay the startup so they can be synchronized with the sound equipped units. Lucky for me, as I wasn't sure when I first ordered them. The 442 and Via Intermountain F7 going for a run. The 442 on the runaround track. An early test run of some more louver vans prior to deckling. A New South Wales Government Railways 442 with passenger cars sits on the runaround track. You can see yet another donation to the layout with a signal box sitting in front of the coaling station. This is an Explorer set I painted up for a friend. It is a 5-car set with the train splits at Goulburn with 3 units travelling to Canberra and the other 2 to Griffith. It also has the CountryLink logos that were later removed. They ran for a time with no signage and have only recently appeared with New South Wales train logos. This is an Amtrak FP40 Cato model and some new Cato Bud cars. We're just about there, so get ready with your questions. This is a pair of Austrac modular units called Binder. A 91-year-old friend of mine gave them to me with only the track blade on bare boards for me to finish off. The layout also gave me the opportunity to practice Australian scenery, which doesn't have too much green. This is the freight yard I did for the passenger car servicing sheds. I recently had the opportunity to share the finished layout with my 91-year-old surveyor friend. I learnt never to underestimate how much time and effort it takes to complete a layout. Even though the buildings are largely kits, it still took lots of time to finish. This is the scratch-built Canberra 1914 station that took out Model of the Show award at the 2019 Canberra N-Scale Convention here in Canberra. This is my current project, Canberra. Far distance you can see the 1914 station, the 1926 station, the 1942 extension, and the 1926 station, and the current station built in 1963. In the foreground will be the Griffin station that was never built, but it is in his original alignment. An Explorer is at the platform with a Zephyr sitting at the goods shed waiting for a run. Here is the 44 class pulling BS and FS carriages out of Canberra station. And that's it. Thank you for listening. I will now hand back to the team to answer any questions that you may have.
Okay, so we're back in the NMRAx studio, and we've got Pat here. That was a sensational little video that you put together there, and we're having a chat through the while the video was playing, saying how easy it is to put a video together. You think it's only going to take 5 minutes, and 2.5 days later you're still editing. Anyhow.
Yeah.
Okay, Pat. So let me have a little look at the computer over here, and let's see. We've got some questions happening, and there was a comment from all the way from the UK, from Andy. He wanted to know those Barkman Metro liners. How did you get those to run so well? What was the secret?
Lots and lots of patience, lots of cleaning the contacts and venting the contacts, and then just running them for a few hours. But yeah, they are a very difficult mechanism to get running reliably. And they even stall a bit when you first start them as well. So you usually need a little push to start them.
A little cooperation.
Yeah.
And we had another comment here. Have you converted them to DCC yet?
Yeah, so probably about 2/3 of my fleet is DCC. So it runs on the club. Most of it will run on the club layout. The Metro liners don't. I'd love them to be, because they're one of my favourite trains. I'd love them to be converted, but no. So for those that don't know, the Metro liner was one of the first high-speed trains, even before the Japanese one. It was the first 160 mile per hour service, which is 200 kilometers per hour.
Cool. And while we're on the subject of DCC, what's your Dakota brand of choice, or do you tend to use whatever is available and whatever's on special at the time, like I usually do?
Yeah, so that's a really good question. I generally look at the locomotive. If it's DCC fitted and ready to run, I'll check both is it TCS and Barkman Digitrax to see which is the better Dakota and easier to fit. Watch a few videos. The other ones in our Australian ones, we've actually been using a Chinese Dakota, which is about $25 a pop. And I think I've got about 13 in my toolbox that I've blown up as well. Interestingly enough, yeah, all my fault, mind you. And interestingly enough, I've managed to blow them up in all different spots. So there's not one that's got the same burn mark on it. I don't know how I've achieved that.
Yeah, yes, I know how you feel. I've had that experiment with some electronics that when the magic smoke goes, that's the end of it. You've got a lot of New South Wales stuff there, and I know, being an Australian modeler myself, but in HO, I know in scale it's very hard to get some of the equipment that you've got there. So do you want to run us through some of the rolling stock and some of the models that you had there that were Australian and mainly New South Wales based?
Yeah, sure. So the 44 class, and you're dead right, particularly in N-scale, Australian stuff is really hard to get. And if you want it, you either need to make it or paint it. So the XPT there is a painted 3D computer print, which I had to paint and decal myself. And also I wasn't happy with the front nose on it, so it got modified. The Badger kits, which was the 44 class, So prior to that, there was an Bertrand 44 class, but it was way out of scale for N scale. So the Badger ones are actually more to scale, highly detailed, but it still has that Australian modelling element in that you can't buy it with your road numbers on it. You actually have to apply the decals yourself to get whatever road number you want. So there's still that hobby modelling. The rest of it is either cast kits, urethane cast kits, or I've also got into some brass modelling as well. So all the cattle wagons were actually brass, etched brass, and then soldered together, which is something I've always wanted to learn how to do. So yeah, done that too.
Excellent. Yeah, we'll have to give a shout out to Phil Badger, Badger Models. He really does take on the difficult market of Australian outline prototype. And yeah, as you said, there's all the numbers. You can't buy a numbered loco. You're going to put the numbers on because he doesn't know how many of each number he's going to sell. So yeah, makes it more cost effective to do it that way. But no, I've seen some of his stuff at shows, and I've met Phil a couple of times, and yeah, very nice guy, and they're great little models. And I've often dabbled in the thought of getting some N-scale Australian stuff, but yeah, when I see the price tag, sometimes it knocks me back. But
yeah, so a lot of my stuff I get off the Facebook pages as well. There's a Facebook N-scale marketplace. So I've got a lot of stuff on there, but like if you don't bid for it or tell the guy you're interested in the first 5 minutes, you've lost it because it just
exactly. Yeah. And with your obviously using DCC, so what brew or what brand of DCC system do you operate with, and what have you found to be the pros and cons of that system?
Yeah, okay. So at home I use NCE, Power Cab, and then at the club we use Digitrax system. I think they've got a DCS 240 and a DCS 100, and we've just split that into separate power districts. So pros and cons between the two systems. The biggest headache we get from it is the different way they consist. So NCE will consist 127 down to, I think it's 123. So if you leave them consist and you go on the Digitrax system, it won't recognize your locos. You actually have to pick up that consist number. So you just work your way from 125 down to 123 till you find the consist. Or I found out recently you just set CV19 to 0, but I haven't tried that yet.
Okay, and we got a few comments here of Railfan, the dog. First of all, someone wants to know, does he actually have his own budget for one, treats, and secondly, model trains?
He doesn't need any treats. He just say, here's the trains running, and he'll come running from out of nowhere. So he does that every night, and even when we go to bed, if I haven't run the trains that night, he'll sit near the door of the train room and won't come to bed till we run them. So in terms of budget, he generally has budget when I'm not allowed to buy something, and then the wife says, I thought you weren't allowed, I told you weren't allowed to buy this train. I said, I didn't, the dog did. So
that's a good way. I'll have to remember that. I've got my partner in crime asleep here in the aircon. Yeah, he's going to be buying a lot of trains lately, I think. The other question was, and how old is he, and what type of dog is he?
So he's 8 years old. He's a cross with a corgi and a border collie. Yeah, so a border collie with short legs.
That's where the train watching comes from.
Yeah.
And do you want to give us a bit of an update on the club's layout while you're online here, and the happenings in the club, being as we're going through this weird time of some parts of the country being locked down, and in some parts of the country doing what they're doing, and
Yeah, I'll have to replay this because my president's report's about due for the AGM. So, yeah, with COVID, it's been a very interesting year. We probably didn't run trains for 3 months. The club itself has about 40 AusTrack modules, which are about 1.2 meters long by 600 standard. Although we do have a turntable module, which is 1800 by 1200. so it's quite large. We hire a local scout hall once a month, and we set it up on the Saturday and pull it down on the Sunday. We've only been doing that probably for the last 2 or 3 years. So when I first joined, I think we just attended 3 railway shows a year, and of course there's been none of those this year. We're looking forward to the first one in March, which is at Kaleen, which is one where we can run, I think we're planning to run 35 modules put together, which will be about 10 meters by 10 meters in a sort of U shape. So yeah, so in terms of the club, our members are getting older, and a lot of those modules are stored at their house. So we've just been successful in getting a government grant to build a shed down at the local showground. So long as we can convince the local showground people that we're nice people and happy to share with us.
Yes.
So we're looking at building a 30 by 12 metre shed down there to set up a permanent layout. The closest one we run on at the moment is Sydney N up in Rockdale. So yeah, I'm a member there as well.
Okay, not a problem. Well, I'll have a little look on the computer. What have we got? Any more questions here? Have you standardized on a particular type of coupler? So getting back to N scale, yeah, there's all different types of couplers. So yeah.
So really good question. So I'm really trying to get everything onto microtrains couplers, or Cadee, I think they are in HO scale, exactly the same sort of coupler. Although having that, I do have a number of transition couplers, so I can mix and match the old Rapido couplers with the microtrains couplers.
Cool. And yes, we've got a little comedian up here in Brisbane, goes by the name of Craig Mackey, and he's asking, is it a Barkman dog, as in Barkman dog?
Yeah.
So I think he was up too late last night, and yeah, you might have had too many wobbly pops, I think, and gone there. But anyway, Pat, that was great. Another great little clinic, and I don't think I've missed any more of the questions. I'll have a look over here on the computer. What do you reckon, Brad? Have I got them all, or did Speed's been putting them there, and I've been able to see them when they came up on the screen? So yeah. Okay, so thanks a million, Pat, for attending, and we look forward to another chat soon. And
no worries. Yeah, I have to scratch my head and think about what to do next.
Yes, yeah. Well, these N scale Australian locos are looking quite interesting because, as you said, I mean, there's only a few ready to run ones, so a lot of them you've had to do a fair bit of work on them. So yeah.
Yeah. Cut apart, changing couplers on them, all sorts of stuff. You name it, you get to do it in N scale, because if you don't, you can't run Australian, basically.
That's basically, yeah, true.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I think we're going to go for a break now. We'll get our next clinician in the room and get set up in the studio here. So thanks a million again, Pat, and we shall speak to you soon.
No worries. Thanks, heaps. You're doing a great job.
Cheers, bud.
Bye.
Okie dokes, we're back here in the NMRAx Studio 1, the remodel job, and we're still down here in Australia after being down in New South Wales at the nation's capital in Canberra in the ACT, or just Queanbeyan, just outside. We're now heading over to, I believe it's Central Coast in New South Wales, or in the middle of New South Wales, to meet John Parker, who's been a long-time member of the NMRA in Australia and been involved in many clinics. I've seen them at various clinics around the country, and I believe you're going to give us some tips on backdrop painting today. So I'd like to introduce John Parker to the NMRAx streams. John.
Hi there.
Now, I understand we've got a video that we're going to play that's going to run for about 20 odd minutes or so, and then after that we'll be back and we'll have some questions for John. So I think if Brad's got the reels on the projector, we can fire her up and off we go.
Hi there. My name's John Parker, and I'm here to talk about painting simple backdrops. I'm no artist, but it seems to work for me, and I guess it could work for you too. My approach is simple. The main act is always the train. The backdrop is only a stage prop. Let's look at this scene. What's missing? Well, there are no details. Your mind can compensate for the lack of details, and I don't bother painting trees or clouds. They just add complexity. If you must have trees or clouds and you don't feel confident, either use a stencil or get someone who can paint it for you. Let's talk about the tools I use. I like to use hog bristle brushes. They're stiff brushes. They're not like the soft brushes you paint with watercolours with. I also have a palette knife and a palette board, which I made, a piece of ply just with some Formica stuck on top, but you can buy them if you wish. I have a water jar that wet my brushes in, and a rag to wipe clean any mistakes. I have 5 basic earth colours as shown here, and also I use white titanium paint to tone down these colours to make them more natural, so the scene doesn't shout at you. Here's a light green, a medium grey and Payne's grey colours I use a lot. The Payne's grey is a must-have because it allows you to create shadows on hills. It's a range of 5 useful colours that you may or may not use, but I'll keep them handy. Let's start by looking at some scenes rather than worrying about how we paint them. You get the idea as we look at them. Here's a place here where I've got some rocks on the layout, and now they're blending into the backdrop. I've painted at the top there, as you see, some of the rocks, and then they form part of a mountain range which seems to be dropping away to the right. This is to give the impression or the illusion that the range is moving away from you. Of course, in the middle there you've got a more intermediate scene with browns and greens to represent the closer hill in front of that range. The range now drops right away into the distance there at the right, but then if you look closer, there's a lighter grey mountain range behind that again, which starts to take over the scene and move the eye away from what you're looking at towards a whole new scene, as demonstrated here by these hills and flat ground. And again, you'll see these paint strokes, the long sweeping paint strokes that seem to give some shape and colour to the scene. Sorry about the focus on this camera. Very well, now as we look at this, green, yellowy green and then greys, it's there designed to let you think, but it's not a black, flat backdrop, but rather it has some dimension, some depth. And there's a little rock face there, which I'll put late in the episode. But then I painted around it and created these hills. Now, hills are created by painting light colour strokes over a darker colour into that valley, then the shade on the side of that hill, it sweeps up over the top of that ridge of the hill and down the other side, all done with paint strokes. You need to know which side the sun's going to shine on your painting, which side the shade's going to be. Let's have a look at some more. Okay, now here's some other hills where these long paint strokes, sweeping strokes, lighter colours on a darker colour, creates this illusion of complexity, and actually it's quite simple. If you look where the arrow is pointing, there's a really bright spot at the top of that hill. Well, I can make that lighter by painting it with just water on my brush, and it dilutes the paint pigment. Or if you're not light enough, you just put a little bit of white paint, just a little bit on your brush, and just work it in, and the grey will then tone down the white and give you possibly the result you want. Okay, let's have a look at a few more examples that might inspire you to give a go, but do so on a piece of scrap board, not on your backdrop. Let's go back to that little rock face there. Originally it wasn't there, so I decided it was a bit too plain, so I painted the rock face. Then I painted the green up towards the base and over the top of it, and created that extra little scene just to break the monotony of mountains and hills. You'll notice there's a dark green hill colour, then it's covered with these lighter green strokes. These light green strokes are long, sweeping, random strokes done with a small brush, and as you sweep them, you move the hill slope away towards the right there. We'll get there in a moment. Now close up they don't look very much. When you stand back, they look quite acceptable. And there you go. And now it drops over that ridge down into a valley, or a hill, gully rather, and then it comes up, sweeps up the side of this incline there on the extreme right. It's under shade. The curves paints over the top of the ridge of that hill and down the other side. You've got to keep in mind from the very beginning which side the sun's going to be shining on and which side the shadow is going to be on as well. Don't mix them up. Okay, let's look at this hill. Here's a case where the further away it gets, the lighter the colour and less detail. And there's a little ridge down the middle in front of it, just the other side of the railway line. Let's have a look at that railway line, come up close to it. You may see here that there's, or you may not notice, but there are dark green bushes along the side, which is to hide where the backdrop butts up against the edge of the layout. And then I've painted green blotches behind those bushes, which match it. And as it goes away, they get lighter green. This is to give the impression that these bushes are now heading off into that hill, into that valley rather, and to camouflage the join. Here's a case where I've got those sweeping paint strokes, but now I'm going to introduce on the right 3 ridge lines. And these 3 ridge lines, even though they're on the same piece of board, look like they're different. In the first ridge, you see there's a lighter green in the middle ridge, and then that's done with just by using a bit of water on the paint just to thin out the colours. And of course the same technique is used on the back ridge, and of course then they sweep up to this hill here. Over the top. Don't worry if you don't get it right the first top pop. I rarely ever get a scene correct first time up. Now when you're painting, a low skyline creates an apparent distance, whereas a high skyline tends to imply that you're reasonably close to it. That's where you notice it here. The high skyline there, and then to the left, that lower skyline dropping off into the distance. There's another issue you've got to consider is what's known as compressed perspective. And when you look down the layout, those hills all of a sudden get shortened. And because they're shortened by optical illusion, they can become unrealistic. That's why I like rolling hills. They're more forgiving in that respect. Okay, you ready to try something a bit more adventurous? Well, once you get this technique under your belt, you can then start painting in some details like I've done here on the top there. Instead of green, I've put grey rock. And then along on the right here, I've introduced a cliff face. And you notice that it looks reasonable, but because it's more detailed, it takes more time. And so you're going to have to spend a bit of time just playing with the on the scrap board, getting the illusion right. Once you've done it a few times, then it becomes second nature. Now you notice how this skyline is dropping away in front of the station. It's getting lower and lower and lower. In fact, it just about drops away to the horizon level. However, as we move along to the right now, it starts to climb up again. This is because I've had a quarter in the room, two walls, and I need to join them. So I put a tunnel there with a surrounding rock face, and then I brought the backdrop up level with the top of the rock castings. And they go across the corner to disguise it behind the loco shed, and those three skylines then drop behind the buildings, and that's it. So let's get away from the theory and let's look at how we paint these hills. Take a board, a piece of scrap board, prime it, and we'll paint it. Now, when you want to draw your outlines, don't use a pencil or a pen because it'll come through your paint. I use some grey acrylic paint, dripped in a little brush, and I just draw the outline there. You'll see it in a moment how I do it. Okay, so that's just done with that. And you can wipe those away if you don't like it. Now you notice here I've got some white titanium paint on my board because I'm always using white titanium paint to mix my colours with. So now how do you get green? Well, you can use a tube of green, but I like to make my own green by recognising the primary colours. The primary colours are, there's yellow and blue. If you learn your primary colours, you see how you make green. So I'm using some yellow oxide here. It's a bit darker than a bright yellow green you see, a yellow rather, you see. Put a squirt on there, and then I get some cobalt blue, and I do the same. Just put it right next to that white paint on the palette. And then using my palette knife, I will mix the green, the blue and yellow together to get green. And you may not see it too well there, but it's a dark green. Now it's too dark, you just grab some white off the board and you rub that in. And you work that in until it gets lighter. And it's a more natural green, I find. And if it's still too dark, then you get more white. And just keep working it in until you get a colour you like. Now, for argument's sake, I've left it this colour to paint onto the board. It doesn't matter if it's not 100% correct. I'll wet a brush. You need water on your brush so the paint will flow when you put it on the board. I'll take a bit of paint off my palette. Don't waste it. And you'll notice when I paint, I follow the outline that I've created. Long, flowing strokes. Get in the habit of doing that. And those paint strokes will become evident when it dries, and you'll start to see the contours that you've blended into the scene. I'll just paint on a bit while you stand there and watch, and we'll come up with something that just as it dries. Okay, here we go. We've now got this hill, well, so it's not finished, but it's good enough for what we're talking about. we're going to have a crack at that little hill in the middle now, in front of that higher one. It's that one I just pointed to. So I want to paint that a lighter green, so I just get a bit white on my brush because I've still got the green on it, and I just paint that hill. And if you need to make it light, just put a bit more white on the brush, but not too much. And just work it in, and it sort of finds its own level of colour as you go along. Okay, we're going to next look at that hill behind that, the new green one we just painted, the one, the far distant hill. We're actually going to paint that in a moment with some Payne's Grey. Payne's Grey gives you that hazy green look. So all I do is I take the Payne's Grey, and you only need a very little. You don't squirt a lot out, because it's a very strong colour. And even you'll see when I mix just a little dab of that, you'll see how dark it becomes when I mix it up with the palette. See that? It's dark. So you work, but by working the green into it, you change the colour to a smoky green. If it's still too dark, you then go to the white paint and you work that in, and that will lighten the grey to a lighter grey. Just get the right shade you want, and then once again, get your brush and take that colour and then start painting along the outline again. Now, it might look a bit dark there at the first, but don't worry, I'll wet the brush, that'll compensate for it, and it then weakens the pigment so it becomes a lighter grey, and you paint that, and then you run your brush over the original grey that you just first started with, and then that moderates the effect. Now, when it dries, it's going to look different. And so if it's not right, then just keep working at it, changing it with your brush, painting the strokes slightly different colour here, there, to get the effect you want. One of the things about acrylic paints, it's very forgiving. You can make mistakes, and a wet rag will just wipe it away. Or if it's not too bad, you can just paint over it, and the colours will just change ever so slightly. So keep using those long paint strokes. That's the important thing. Don't dab at it. Don't have little spots of paint here, there. That looks unnatural, particularly in the distance. Okay, now, this is going to look different when it dries. You'll see what I mean in a moment. You notice I put the brushes in the water. Just keep them wet, otherwise the paint dries on the brushes, and the water will help leach the paint out of the bristles. Okay, now here's the effect. Now you can see I'm going to put two more hills at the background there on the back, but see how those the dry paint changes. You get those brush strokes, the dark greens, the light greens, the brush strokes. Adds complexity, but it's quite simple. Anyway, you may notice I didn't put any blue sky on this bit of board. Well, that can change the effect also. Now I've painted the grey on those hills, and with the Payne's grey and a bit of white, and where my finger is now, you can see where the white paint is highlighting, first of all, the single hill in the foreground, but then it also offsets the mountain range at the back. So you see a clear separation, clear allusion to distance, and of course a slightly darker ridge line against the blue sky would set it off. And you could worry about trees and stuff, but I personally don't think it's necessary. I think they work quite well without trees, but I guess that's a personal thing you might have. I think you'll find after a couple of trees you'll get used to painting grassy scenes. These grass, this green could be anything, could be grass, could be bushes, it doesn't really matter. Your eye will look at it and your mind will see it as a subliminal process. It's there but it's not there sort of thing. Now, the painting in front of us, even though it lacks blue sky, is reasonable. If you put a blue sky, it'll change it again, and they look quite good. Now, when you're painting, keep it simple. That's the secret. Keep it simple. You start adding detail to it, it's going to slow it down unless you're really good at painting. Also, the lighting you use will affect your colours. If you're using sunlight or incandescent lighting or LEDs or fluorescence, they can all affect the way your colour behaves on the backdrop. I'm using here a fluorescent, but I'll leave it to you to decide how you paint the colour you want. Well, this is getting pretty close to being finished, I'd say, for the purpose of a demonstration. Just looking at it, the backdrop, while it looks reasonable, it's not why you're there. You're there to run trains, and the backdrop is to hide the framework of your building, to block it off with things that you don't want to break the illusion. That's why we have backdrops. Well, at the end of every painting session that you might have, your palette could end up looking like a real mess because it's got all these different colour variations on it and stuff that you've used to get the different shades you want. But don't bother about it because it's not wasteful. It's just the price you pay to get the effect you like. And you could have all sorts of colours on your palette, like mine. As I guess the concluding comments, don't practice on your backdrop. Leave your backdrop painted blue for the time being. You can certainly paint your skyline in with a grey paint, but practice on some board. And when you're finished, get a rag, clean it off and try again. You don't have to, a couple of dozen practice boards, but the one board will work. So don't practice on your layout. Don't expect perfection at the first time. Practice will make you better, but it won't make you perfect. All of my work was a result of perseverance and reworking for quite a while before I had the effect I sought. Make your contour strokes smooth and random. Don't be afraid to wipe away your mistakes. Clouds well done can be dramatic, but clear blue skies are also realistic. When you finish painting, if you're going to need to continue painting later on, then just wrap the palette up in the cling wrap and put it in the fridge. Let your brushes soak in the water jar until the residue paint leaches out. Clean your water jar, of course. If you are finished, then wash your brushes clean. Use your palette knife to scrape the old paint off the palette. It's non-toxic paint. And rinse it and dry it for next time. I guess in the back of your mind, you're saying, hey, but what about those missing trees? Well, let me tell you why I don't paint trees on the backdrop. Back in 1982, I painted a scene on a board slightly larger than a sheet of paper. And I was learning how to paint. And here's a hillside in the distance, and they look quite reasonable. They're typically Australian hills. But those trees, they look terrible. They don't look natural at all. And all those little ones in the middle of the picture, they look even worse. So keep things simple. You don't need trees, like I've already demonstrated. How long would it have taken to paint my 20 by 12 layout room? Well, goodness knows, but I know I'm not painting the Sistine Chapel. So enjoy your painting, and hope things go well for you. Bye.
Okay, so we're back here in the studio after watching that little video of some amazing work by John. We've got some questions that have been popping up, so that should open a discussion comment for a while. But first one up, John, is it could be how long's a piece of string, but how many colours of paint do you use?
Well, I use whatever I feel is needed for a particular scene, but the colour that always gets used is white. It's you buy it in a white tube, or you can get it in this container, which is a bit more expensive, but it works out cheaper in the long run. And you just tip it out and then mix it up with the colours that you want, and just keep mixing till it's the colour that you're working on, one colour at a time. And then when you want to do another colour, then you merge it together. It's the nice thing about acrylics, that you just play around with on your palette like that, and till you get the colour you want. You don't mix the colours up on the backdrop. You mix them on your palette, and then you just work it through. But the most colour you use is white. Always use white, because it tones down the colour and doesn't dominate the backdrop.
Okay, so I guess the number of colours of paint that you have could be infinite by the time you mix up all the different combinations that you have.
Well, these are all the basic colours. There's 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 basic colours that I use all the time. Some more than others. You've got your mellow yellow oxide. Payne's grey is a blessing. It's a great tool. Then I've got a neutral grey, red oxide, burnt sienna, raw umber, and this one here is raw sienna. Now, you don't used to use them all. You just pick the ones you want. When you think you've got the colour you want, that's it. Away you go with it. But
off you go.
Try it out. And when you mix it with water, it also softens the colour down too. And then if you need extra colours, which is not very often, I've got these ones here, which is warm yellow, the mid-green, cobalt blue. Those two together give you green, of course.
Yep.
And you've got green, dark green, there's a light green, and this one here is another, it's called Nimbus Grey, which is another variation on the grey. And that's all the colours I have. And these colours aren't expensive, they're just cheap poster colours, most of them. And they work well.
Cool. So there's not, you don't need to have a huge stock of every different type of paint. No. You make your own up.
Yeah, you make your own. Depends on the scene you're trying to create, of course.
Yes.
If you want a lot of green in your scene, well, then you'll obviously need a lot more green. But I tend to focus on southwestern deserts, and they tend to be yellowy brown, red oxide mixed in with it.
Yep.
But then when I need to get long distance shots, I use a bit of green to insinuate that these could be grass, it could be shrubs, it could be anything. And in fact, if you're really bothered about it, it could be trees. But the moment you start painting trees, you're looking at tree trunks and goodness knows what else. So
Yeah.
I just leave it up to your imagination as to what you want to paint. But my philosophy is keep it simple.
Yes. Okay, we had another question. It was here. Someone made the comment of curious why you would paint the front first and find it easier to paint the back row of hills and then work forward.
Well, it depends on the kind of scene you're creating, I guess. You got to start from the back if you like. No worries, but I tend to like to start from the front because then I get the colour I want, desire, and then the further away you go from where you're standing, the further away then the lighter the shades of colour get. And it's easier then to work with a lighter shade after you've got the right shade at the beginning. And if it's still too dark, you can just keep watering it down, toning it down till you get what you want. If you do it the other way around, if you get a medium colour in the backdrop and then you come to the foreground, you end up with a darker colour. It may not be the desired effect you like, but again, it's a personal thing. It's up to the individual how they mix their colours. But I like the way I do it because I don't like to dominate or dominate the scene. The backdrop is only a stage prop for the whole layout. It's not the centre of attention. It's merely it's just a tool to cover that blank wall that you would have if you didn't have a backdrop.
Yes. Yep. No, I agree with that. So no blue background in the back is the comment that's here. So I'd say someone's saying.
Can I just come back? That sample I was painting on, I didn't put blue in because I figured anybody can paint a blue backdrop.
Yes.
Even get a roller, you could paint blue if you wanted to. The real technique is not painting the sky. The real technique is painting the hills and the mountains in the distance. So I didn't bother painting blue, and I think I made a mention of that in the video in the clinic.
Yep.
But I didn't. I just left it white. But yeah, by all means, paint it blue if that's what you want to do. For the little bit that I had, for the 20 odd minutes I had to do this clinic, I just forgot about doing the blue because I didn't think it was that important.
Not a problem. Someone's made a comment here about the Great Plains. So have you got any tips on how you would do an area like the Great Plains with the rolling hills and the likes?
Great Plains where? Just in Australia or in America or where?
I would say in America. Speed hasn't put that down there, so I would say in the States, yep.
My only experience with the Great Plains personally, I was up around through Montana, Idaho way. I presume that's the sort of area we're talking about, rolling hills. I would just make your hills low, keep them just low, and don't try to paint the Matterhorn in the middle of the picture. Just keep them rolling hills because I'm a great believer in rolling hills. I think in the clinic I said when you look down the layout, the optical illusion cramps causes those little hills to become peaks, and that's not what you want. You want to keep it low, and that's how I do it. The only other place I've gone through is in Canada, across the grain fields, and but what you would see there is wheat, of course. But the rolling hills of Montana and Idaho, I would do them the way with a medium green near the layout, and then as further away you go, you just keep going down to a lighter green till finally when you get to the end, I mix a bit of Payne's grey, just a little bit of Payne's grey in with the green, and that gives it that hazy look, which is in the distance.
Cool. Another question we got here. When you start your backdrop painting, do you have any standard height above the baseboard for the illusion of the horizon, so the horizon height? Do you have any dimensions you stay in there?
Well, first of all, it depends how tall you are, and depends on the height of the baseboard to begin with. I have a 3-deck layout, and most of the stuff you've seen on that video is around the top deck. And so if you really want to get distance, I guess you might have the foreground fairly high. You might want to make it, I don't know, for an American for American models, it's probably about 12 inches high. And then if you're doing, for people who dabble in metric, you find what that is in metric, and then you, as further away you go, the hills get lower and lower and lower, but not too low in the distance. But yeah, as I say, it's a matter of just practicing getting the colours. Get a sheet of scrap bit of board, paint it white, paint it blue, and then just paint your have a go painting it. See, is that what you want? Is that how you like it? If it's not, get a wet rag, wipe the whole thing clean, and start again. It's not hard. But it does take practice, and that's the thing. I can't guarantee the technique makes you a Tom Roberts or a Michelangelo, but what it does, it helps you get confidence, and as you become more confident, then you're more likely to experiment a little bit with changing the colours or changing the technique. But the real basic under thing is keep it simple.
Yes.
Simplicity is what makes things believable, I believe, anyway.
Cool. On the subject of paints, I know before when you showed us all the different types of acrylics you had there, what's your thoughts on oil paints? Do you use any oil paints in your background painting, or? Well,
you can use oil paints. Years and years ago, about almost 40 years ago, I went to a night school for about 6 months with an old retired school teacher who was teaching us how to paint in oils. And oil painting's nice, particularly if you're doing a portrait or doing a scene, but I don't know how I'd want to tackle a large layout room with oil paints, but you can do it. But I've never used oil paints on the layout. I found that the acrylics are very forgiving. You make a mistake, they're easy to clean up. If you're on oils, you've got to find some way of cleaning off the oil paint.
Okay. Yeah. I guess, if you make a blunder with oil paint, it's not going to be as easy as just getting a wet rag and wiping it down.
Well, you hit the board with terps or whatever you're going to use to clean it with, it's going to have an effect on the paint you've already got that you want to keep.
Exactly.
But, I mean, I'm sure there are excellent people who paint layout backdrops with oil, and fine, good for them. But for me, I found that acrylics are very forgiving because I make so many blunders, and when I start, I get to go back and tidy it up and fix it up.
Oh, well, I'm not even allowed to touch a paintbrush in my club. Apparently, I'm not very good. I can usually apply paint by pouring it. That's about it. But
or stirring.
Or stirring, yeah. When I take the stirrer out without turning it off first, and it sprays paint everywhere. Yes. So from your background, do you have any artistic training? Did you do any special courses to learn it? So what's a bit about your background with that side of it?
I said a moment ago, when I was about 40 years ago, I took my son along to art classes of a Wednesday night, tried to do something as a father and son sort of project. Well, my son, bless him, didn't he was hopeless. Don't let him hear me say that, though. But I think he'd agree. But I stuck it out because I found it was interesting. But a lot of people go there, they just do it for a therapeutic experience of painting just to get rid of their stresses. I've always liked illustrating, but as far as formal training go, I just teach myself, and if it looks right, that's good enough. If it's not right, then I just go back and fix it.
Good, excellent.
That's the beauty of keeping things simple. The more you complicate it, the more potential you got for stuffing it up. Yes,
very, very true. And someone made the comment here that your layout has a large amount of linear backdrop. Did you paint it in sections? How large? Or did you do, here we go, or did you do a Michelangelo marathon one-timer?
No, I built the layout, and the backdrop sort of fitted in with what was there. But there's one long spot there where there's a railway yard along the back wall, and that took me about a week to do. And I must confess, by the end of the week, I'd had enough of it. And but in other parts of the layout there was a seam with a lot of rocks and tunnels on the left-hand side. Then it just drops away into towards the right. That it takes a while, but you keep. It's like any sort of art. You keep working until you get the result you want. It rarely ever comes out right first time. I've gone back time and again and just reworked it and cleaned it up and reworked it. And finally, the more you do it, the better you get at it.
Okay.
So don't expect to be a professional from the first day you put your brush to the backdrop.
Okay, and we got our final question we got down here is, do you use photos as a guide to improve the realism?
That's a good question. If you've got no concept of what you want, some people can visualize in their mind what they want to see, and other people just see a blank wall. Yes, find some photos, and use that as a guide, but don't try to replicate the photograph because it's too hard. Even commercial artists find that it's just good to have a model that you can work on. Someone to sit there and while you paint them, or you look at a scene and you paint the scene. To do it from inside a train layout room is not easy, and so yeah, by all means. But my advice is just keep it simple. Rolling hills works fine. If you want trees, you can put the trees on there. I think I had a little section towards the end of that clinic where I did paint a small painting in oils. And the scene wasn't too bad, except the trees were terrible. It's horrible trees. My art teacher said they look like tombstones.
And I guess our final question is, have you had any experience in painting, say, urban scenes or towns in the background, or buildings in your background?
Well, I never paint buildings.
Okay.
First of all, because I work on the basis of simplicity. I do the backdrops, and then I grab what I've done in the past is I've downloaded pictures of buildings, cut them out, glued them onto board, plastic, whatever you want to use, and I stick them over the top of the backdrops. It takes an exceptional artist to paint a believable building that people can say, yeah, that's a painting. But if we go to a lot of trouble trying to get reality into your layout, my advice to you is get some photos of buildings, cut them up and glue them onto your backdrop. Because I don't attempt it.
Okay.
I really don't. I find other things, the devices like brick walls and stuff that I can model and put on there. But as far as buildings go, I've downloaded from some DVDs, CDs I got from the States, which have buildings photographed, and I just print them out on a printer, and then you got to. Some of mine have faded with age, a bit like me, but you lacquer them, or you put a coat of clear varnish on them, try and retain the colour. But I cut them out and stick them on the back wall, and people see a building, and then they don't notice the backdrop. Or if they see the backdrop, they don't notice the building. It's a funny thing about. I was, if I can just digress a bit, somebody sent me a video yesterday of a motor car that was being advertised. And you're watching this car and nothing's happening. At the end of 5 minutes, you realise that what's happened, all the buildings in the background behind the car have all changed. Colours have changed, the buildings have changed, because you're focused on this car. And I think that's the trick with backdrops. You focus on the layout, not the backdrop.
Yes. No, that's excellent. That was some really good information in that clinic there, John, and you've answered all these questions particularly well. So I thank you for your time and patience in coming on NMRAx. And I got another comment down that's just come in down here, and it said, has your layout been shown in any of Jerry Hopkins's layout tour videos as yet?
Yeah, if you go to the NMRA Australia website and you look down the layout galleries, there's one there called the Barron Creek and Santa Fe Railway, and that's been there for yonks. A lot of the photographs need to be replaced because they're dated. They don't have all the scenery done. But I've also hinted to Jerry that I'd like to replace some of those photographs with the more recent ones, which have the scenery completed. And but if you do go to that website, the NMRA Australia website, and look under layout galleries, you'll find they're divided up into DC layouts and DCC layouts, Australian layouts, and so on. You find it in there.
Not a problem. They were saying otherwise we need to get a video, so I think we need to get Jerry to come down there and do a detailed video so he can get that up on the website.
There was a website. Jerry did do a video there at one time when the layout was still undergoing work, and it's already there, but it's changed since then. And you're right. He's more than welcome to come down and produce a video of it, because it may not be around for too much longer.
I think when everybody's back and moving again, I think he'll be down there to put something together. No doubt there's probably messages coming from him right now. I just saw my messengers just went up by 3 messages, so one of those could be Jerry. Anyhow, as I said, John, thanks a million for helping us out here and doing that presentation. I think we got quite a bit out of it. There's quite a few questions, and we'll have to get you back for another little chat at some time. So from us, thank you very much.
More than welcome. Thanks, Martin. Bye.
Not a problem. Bye. Okay, so we've got a couple of housekeeping things to do. We're at the end of the show. So let me see. We got. I think Brad or some of the others are going to come in. Yeah, here we go. That way I can turn my screen doesn't look like it's disappearing down the tunnel like the beginning of Doctor Who or something like that. So, okay. Well, coming up, we've got NMRAx, which is happening in early April. I don't think, is it going out on our YouTube channel, or are they putting it out on their own? I'm not quite sure.
I believe it'll be put out on their stuff, Speed.
I think we're streaming it.
Yeah.
We're streaming it, so it'll be on this channel, so keep a lookout. You'll get a notification at NERX. They're going to be doing another convention in early April. It's on the 10th and the 11th, the weekend of the 10th and the 11th. And moving along then in March, we've got another NMRAx coming up. I think we've got a full roster for that one already there, Speed. It's all booked up, and we've got a few interesting things coming up there, a couple of new little items maybe popping in. So that's the 27th of March, or if you're in Australia, the 28th of March. And of course, we better give a mention to this, but the Rocky Mountain Train Show. They're going to have an online show, and it's in late March, but I believe one of the NMRAx crew is going to be doing some hosting. I believe an Englishman that's stuck on a rock in the middle of the Atlantic Ocean is going to be doing the hosting for for the Rocky Mountain Train Show. So stay posted. We'll have more information on that. And of course, last but not least, we need to push the YouTube channel. So you guys out there, if you haven't subscribed, hit the subscribe button, hit the little bell ding-a-ling thing next to it, and that'll tell you when the next presentation's coming up and when we're going live next. And also on the YouTube channel, if you want to subscribe in there, you can subscribe and you'll get notifications of when the next shows are coming up. So hit those buttons, see if we can make those numbers go up. And I think that's about it for this month. I don't really think there's anything else we need to cover, or have I forgotten something really important?
I just want to mention that when you do subscribe and you do click the bell icon, not that we are making or needing 1 million people to click the bell icon, but every once in a while people ask for where is a link to the video. If you are subscribed and you do click the bell, then you will get an email or a notification, and then you do have the video. Like, where's the video from the earlier parts of today? Those would have been in your notification system. So since we cannot post links in here, well, I think we can, but I cannot. So that's a quick way to get to the first 4 clinics of today by looking at all the things that you were notified about.
Good point. Good point. So even more of a reason to hit that subscribe and hit that link button. So I think if there's no more to do, I reckon we might shut this down and go and have some lunch. And I think Brad's been up since about 5 o'clock this morning, so he's about ready to go and have an afternoon nap. And from me, I'll catch you all later on.
See you later.
Be safe.